Good morning, everyone. The hearing will come to order. I welcome everyone in the room and certainly welcome the commander. I thank my colleague from the House, Chairman Bost, along with ranking members Blumenthal and Takano, and the rest of my Senate and House colleagues for joining us here today in this joint hearing, the final of 3 hearings our committee hosted this year. I, of course, specifically welcome Commander Al Lipphardt, his wife Carroll, and the rest of his team at the VFW. I also welcome all of the organizations represented on the second panel and those who have traveled here from across the country to represent veterans, service members, caregivers, families, and survivors. I also want to give a special hello, of course, to Kansans in the audience and those watching at home. The VFW is a major and important organization in our state. I appreciate the relationship I have with them. The work we do on our committees would not be possible without the work and the dedication of the VSO community. Our accomplishments are a result of your advocacy and the efforts to hold Congress and the VA accountable for doing what is in the best interest of our veterans and military communities. One example of this is the Elizabeth Dole 21st Century Veterans Healthcare and Benefits Improvement Act, which was signed into law last Congress and supported by the organizations, all of the organizations we will be hearing from today. We are working to make certain this legislation is implemented in a timely manner and in adherence with congressional intent so that it lives up to the promise for veterans, caregivers, and survivors. All of the policies and programs that we will discuss today depend upon a strong and effective VSO community and a strong and effective VA workforce to deliver the care and benefits veterans and their families deserve. As the VA implements new federal workforce guidance and we work together to root out any waste, I am committed to making certain that the necessary VA workforce is preserved. In that regard, it would be useful to retain the Inspector General to work to help the Department and Congress better inform our decisions. The VA must be forthcoming and transparent with Congress, VSOs, and the public about how it's implementing workforce and contract and other changes. The VA must also work to avoid or correct actions that could in any way undermine access to care and benefits that veterans and their loved ones rely on. I again thank you for you all being here today. I look forward to the testimony of the witnesses on both panels, and I now yield to Chairman Bost for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Rand. Good morning. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank you to my Senate colleagues, Chairman Moran, Ranking Member Blumenthal, for hosting us this week. And I would like to thank the VFW's National Commander, Alfred Lipphardt, for being here today. Thank you, Commander. I would also like to give a shout out to the VFW Auxiliary National Commander, Brenda Bryant. Thank you for being here. And I'm pleased that there are folks here from the great state of Illinois. And if you would, I just want you to stand if you can, or raise your hand, or be recognized. There they are. Thanks for being here. And I want to thank you all for traveling here to your nation's capital for such important issues. This Congress marks a decade on this sacred committee for me. And it's my second term as chair. It is an honor to serve all of you. The mission of VA committee has always been personal to me. I grew up in a home with veterans, and many of you have heard it before, but I'm still going to say it again. It's my dad and his brothers, Army, Korean War. My grandfather, one was Navy, Second World War. Other grandfather, Marine, Korea. Uncle, Marine, Vietnam, victim of the ultimate oxymoron friendly fire, but because of VA has had a very successful life and he's up in his years now. I, peacetime Marine. My son is a lieutenant colonel, a reservist now, but was active for many years. And my grandson, the son of my daughter, just got out of the Corps about 6 or 8 months ago. He was an F-18 mechanic. So as you can tell, it's kind of personal to me, but it's an honor to serve you. And every time I sit at the dais, when we're getting in debates, whether it's with an agency or another side of the aisle, my focus isn't on the person I'm discussing, it's on the veterans we're serving. It's always about you. It's always about the veterans, because that's why the VA was created. Not for bureaucrats, but for the veterans. Now, I know the sacrifice each of you have made because my family made them. Each of you have fought to protect our constitutional rights. I'm particularly proud of the work VFW has done to improve transition from active duty to civilian life. You wrote in your testimony about the Transition Assistance Program can be improved and how it can be improved to ensure all transitioning service members are connected to benefits and resources as soon as possible. And I'm looking forward to working with you on making improvements where we can to modernize the delivery of care and services at VA and DOD when we're using the TAP program. Now, under my leadership, we've listened to the men and women serving around the world who just wanted a simple program that meets their needs. There is more to do through legislation to increase the ability of DOD and make their accountability, but to make DOD accountable to putting the TAP program in the as a right priority for those people who are leaving service. I'm optimistic that with our new leadership in the Pentagon, this will finally happen. I do want to let you know, though, in 1983, when I left the Marine Corps, they had a TAP program. The colonel tapped me on the shoulder and said, "See you later." That was it. So we are doing our job to make sure that we help you. But remember, like we talk about the VA, if you've seen one VA, you've seen one VA. If you've seen one TAP program, you've seen one TAP program. We have to have the ability to help these service members as they leave to make sure they know and understand what's available to them. VFW will play a vital role, an important role in making sure we advance common sense proposals and conduct oversight to meet the needs of the entire veteran community, no matter where they live or where they want to work. Veterans should have the freedom to use the benefits of VA offered no matter where they're at, to meet their individual needs. And they shouldn't be spending hours driving in a car to get there or combing through wonky paperwork for months on end to figure out what's available to them, or needlessly waiting on a phone call to get a simple answer. You know where the VA is falling short, and you know where we need to push the agency to bring it out of the Stone Age and into the modern age. We cannot let the bureaucracy continue to grow without concrete results for you, the men and women who serve. You have my commitment that as long as I'm in charge and will continue to fight for you and the voices that you represent, the hundreds of thousands of veterans outside the DC Beltway who just want their health care on time, their benefits when they need them. This old corporal takes this mission seriously, and I know our new VA Secretary and my friend Doug Collins does too. Under President Trump's leadership, I know we are going to put you, the veteran, the VA services back at the center of the VA mission. And when the bureaucrat tries to get in the way, I'll continue to be the first one to hold them accountable and get the answers for you. We made great progress through the Dole Act to provide support for homeless program to ensure VA continue to lift veterans out of homelessness and get them back living fulfilling lives. My door has and will continue always to be open. We must deliver for our veterans to protect their health care choices, expand economic opportunity and education, streamline benefits to move VA and the services it provides forward. Now, I promise to keep up the fight together with you, and I look forward to completing our mission alongside of you. Now, I want to thank the Senator again for having us here today, and with that, I yield back.
Chairman Boss, thank you. You said as long as you're in charge. I just want to remind you, you are
I'm in the Senate now.
today.
Yeah, that's true. I'll be on my best behavior.
We look forward to that. I now yield to the ranking member of the Senate Committee, Senator Blumenthal, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to everyone for being here today. Commander Lipphardt, Chief Lipphardt, and all of your team and all of the VFW and other veterans who are here today. I hope we have a few veterans from, a few members of the VFW from Connecticut. If you're here, yes, indeed, thank you. I have particular honor and pleasure to welcome you today, Chief Lipphardt, because the VFW has been a key partner in helping pass important legislation and for veterans and their families, keeping our promises to our nation's heroes. And I want to thank you very, very deeply for the very forthright and powerful statement you made in reaction to the firing and the funding freezes, in effect saying, and I think I'm quoting directly, stop the bleeding. I quoted you last week at both of our hearings extensively, and I put your statement into the record. And I think your leadership at a time when others perhaps kept their heads down is typical of the VFW and provides a guiding light for other similar organizations and an alarm, a wake-up call. Sounding that alarm is a real public service. It's tough to focus on efforts and legislative priorities when so many of our previous efforts are being rolled back without consulting us. In other words, how do we go forward with new legislation when the priorities can simply be ignored and the legislation violated? For instance, on hundreds of contracts, Secretary Collins proudly announced that he had canceled a number, in fact, 875, and we're confused now as to which of those cancellations has been rescinded. There was an announcement, I think, just in the last 24 hours that perhaps now the number's been reduced to 600. I've demanded information and clarity as to those contracts. I believe others on the committee may have done as well. We have been informed that one of those canceled contracts is the Veteran-Directed Care Program, something we codified and expanded in a bipartisan manner with the Dole Act. This program allows aging and disabled veterans to receive care in their home, a cost-effective alternative to nursing home care. It's absolutely integral to the VA's continuing of long-term care services. But it's just one of the hundreds of contracts that Secretary Collins seems intent on canceling, contracts that provide critical services to veterans and their families and allow the VA itself to identify waste, fraud, and abuse. We can't confirm that this specific contract is on the list of 585 that he canceled last night, or the 875 he announced he would cancel last week, because he won't share the list with us. He just wants to use the numbers for his press release. No transparency, no accountability, no consultation. In the process, he continues to claim that abruptly canceling hundreds of services will not impact veterans' care and benefits in any way. If that sounds realistic to anybody in this room, I'd like to talk to you. Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit for the record an article from the Kentucky Public Radio published on February 25 titled "Kentucky Business Among Hundreds Losing Veteran Service Contracts Amid Trump Cuts." I have it here.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In this article, Army veteran Neil Riley is quoted, quote, Secretary Collins said specifically that it wouldn't impact veteran health care or benefits in any way, and that is specifically a lie, end quote. Mr. Riley's company is a federally certified service disabled veteran-owned small business that had all of its VA contracts canceled last week, all of them canceled last week. And it's just one of dozens of veteran-owned small businesses who had their contracts canceled and were forced to lay off hundreds of employees. Many of those employees were veterans themselves. These contracts help ensure the safety of low-income housing for veterans who are homeless or transitioning from care. It isn't simple waste. It isn't waste at all. It's not hypothetical. It isn't abstruse or abstract. It's one of many human examples of impacts of this administration's actions, and it's not happening on some imaginatory mind. It's happening in real life. It's just the tip of the iceberg. We've also heard directly from VA employees and veterans that the VA has terminated critical researchers, planned to cancel a PAC Act Enterprise Program Management Office contract that could derail implementation of the PAC Act. It's delayed facility openings and reduced inpatient beds. It's canceled 50 patient appointments at a VA facility last week due to staff shortages. It's fired Veterans Crisis Line employees in one wave of termination, rehired them after receiving the backlash, and then fired even more during a second wave. Not to mention the thousands of other VA employees and veterans fired without cause. I will introduce later today a resolution. I'll seek unanimous consent for it, asking that these firings be reversed. Each of them has their own story. They are men and women serving alongside your doctors and nurses. They process your disability compensation claims. They ensure veterans have a final resting place that honors their service to a grateful nation. Many of them are veterans who choose to continue their service by serving their fellow veterans. They've been callously discarded. Chief, your testimony says that VFW members prefer the VA to remain the primary provider of their health care. We need your help to ensure the VA has the workforce and capabilities to provide that health care, which is the rock of our VA healthcare system. And I want to thank you for staying true, keeping faith, and being a powerful and eloquent advocate for our veterans. We need you now more than ever. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I now yield to the Ranking Member Tucano, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Moran. Today, we close out our annual series of joint hearings with the veteran service organizations. And I'm pleased to welcome our first panel, the National Commander and representatives of the Veterans of Foreign Wars and its auxiliary, as well as our second panel, representatives from the Paralyzed Veterans of America, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Student Veterans of America, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, and the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. And I'd like to extend a special welcome to VA's Commander-in-Chief, Mr. Al Lipphardt, and National Auxiliary President, Ms. Brenda Bryant. Welcome. Before I begin my remarks, I have to ask, are there any Californians in the room? Just had to do it. I grew up with the stories. I just want you to know, I grew up with stories about my three great uncles who served in World War II in the famed 442nd Infantry Regiment. And one of my uncles who fought in Vietnam sadly died by suicide when I was young. Since joining this committee, I have had the honor of visiting the graves of the fallen around the world at cemeteries managed by the Department of Veterans Affairs and the American Battle Monuments Commission. I urge all Americans watching this hearing to put it on your bucket list, to visit some of these amazing hallowed grounds that we meticulously keep and maintain. It is for those service members and veterans and for all of you that I fight to ensure that our country honors the debt that can never be repaid. Honoring that debt means listening to veterans' voices about issues impacting their daily lives and how we can address them. And one of the ways we do that is by holding these hearings with veteran service organizations. It was at these hearings in 2022 when the VSOs stood in solidarity, calling on Congress to pass the Honoring Our Pact Act. Without you, we would never have passed the largest expansion of veterans' health care and benefits since the Vietnam War. Without VFW and countless other VSOs, millions of veterans would still be struggling to access health care for the toxic exposures they experienced in their service to our country. I will always be grateful to you for helping us get it done. The PACT Act was never meant to be a one and done. There is still so much more work to be done because our pact with our nation's veterans is not only about toxic exposure, it is also about our promise to ensure that veterans have access to their care and benefits, and that we do everything we can to end veteran homelessness and veteran suicide, address new categories of illness and injury associated with military service, for example, blast injury and military traumatic brain injury. Finally, achieve Guard and Reserve parity. Ensure that VA is welcoming to all, and I mean all veterans who have earned the right to be at a VA facility. Ensure that VA's infrastructure can support its mission, and so much more. Now, instead of focusing on these critical issues facing veterans, we're being distracted by unnecessary chaos. I have grave concerns about how President Trump's executive orders are being carried out across the federal government, most especially at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the impacts that these orders are already having on veterans. Under the Trump administration, more than 2,400 VA employees have been illegally fired, and many more have opted to leave rather than put up with the chaos and uncertainty that has been inflicted upon them. The worst part is they're not done yet. We expect the administration to continue its efforts to further dismantle the federal workforce. I question how purging the workforce, firing the watchdogs, making VA hostile to women and minority veterans is helping VA serve veterans better. Now, I've sent numerous letters to VA seeking information on the department's implementation of President Trump's disastrous executive orders and have had zero meaningful responses from Secretary Collins, and this is extremely troubling. I was grateful to see VFW's statement supporting federal employees, especially the veterans who have been unlawfully terminated by this administration. VFW continues to be a leader when it comes to standing up for veterans and what they need. So I am heartened to see that the courts appear to be paying attention. Last week, a judge in my home state called these firings illegal. While it's unclear how this ruling will impact the thousands of federal employees who have already lost their jobs, I am hopeful the courts will continue to stand in the constitutional role of providing relief for all the damage that the administration has done. And yes, damage has already been done. Cuts at the Cleveland VA Medical Center have made it harder for veterans to access mental health care and prosthetics, among other services. Restricting access to these crucial mental health services while we are fighting the crisis of veteran suicide is the height of tone deafness. Arguments that veterans are taxpayers too are tantamount to asking veterans to sign up to die for their country again. This is unacceptable. I've been accused of putting bureaucracy over veterans, but I dispute that. What about the veterans who lost their jobs to the Trump administration's indiscriminate firings of federal employees? What about black veterans who were unable to access VA home loans due to redlining? What about women veterans whose services still not valued as much as their male peers and are now worried about the loss of gender-specific care at VA? What about LGBTQ plus veterans whose health is in jeopardy because of the administration's denial of their very existence? Ensuring the institution is there to serve veterans is putting veterans first. It is our job to ensure access to world-class health care and benefits to all veterans who have earned the right, and I take that responsibility very seriously. It is my hope that I can count on the VSO community to help us hold VA accountable to all veterans, and that you will also hold Congress accountable by making sure that we walk the talk, that we are carrying out our constitutional oversight responsibilities by asking tough questions, demanding answers, and taking legislative action when it is needed. We cannot waver in this because we know that veterans, their survivors, and caregivers are depending on us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Takano. I'm going to, in a moment, recognize the senator from Georgia, Senator Ossoff. I was going to indicate while the committee members are here, when we were in the House, we called on members to ask questions based upon their seniority. In the Senate, I don't know whether it's more egalitarian than the House, but we call on people in order of their arrival time. So if you came here and started here and you were early, you get rewarded for good behavior. Maybe it's just the Senate needs some kind of incentive for good behavior. In that regard, let me recognize our colleague from Georgia, Senator Ossoff.
Well, thank you, Chairman Moran and Bost, ranking members Blumenthal and Takano, for the privilege of addressing the Joint Committee today and the privilege of introducing to you a great Georgian, an American hero, a friend of mine, and someone I deeply admire, Al Lipphardt, who is Commander-in-Chief of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Born and raised in Hamilton, Ohio, Al moved to Georgia shortly after enlisting as an infantryman in the United States Army in 1965. And while training in Georgia, he attended Officer Candidate School and was commissioned as an infantry officer. During his time on active duty, Al earned his VFW eligibility through 2 combat tours during the Vietnam War, from 1967 to 1968, and from 1970 to 1971. And through his distinguished service, he received the Combat Infantryman's Badge, Bronze Star with a V device, the Purple Heart, and numerous other awards, concluding his service at Fort McPherson, Georgia in 1979 with the rank of captain. After his military service, Al devoted himself to a life of servant leadership in charitable and fraternal organizations. He also received his Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration from Pacific Western University in 1990. In 2002, Al joined the VFW at Post 12002 in North Fulton, Georgia, as a charter member, and maintains his Gold Legacy Life membership in VFW Post 2667, Noonan, Georgia. That's Coweta County, right, Al? Yes, sir. Along with his family members who are also VFW Department of Georgia Auxiliary Post 2667 Life members. Al has served in elected and appointed positions at all levels of leadership through the organization, earning the coveted Triple Crown Award, achieving All-American Commander status at his post, district, and department levels. And at a moment that brought great honor to the state of Georgia, Al, on August 1st, 2024, you were elected as the 116th National Commander-in-Chief of the VFW. We are so proud of you and so grateful for your service throughout your life. And he has been on the road, taking the pulse of veterans across the nation, service members and military families alike, traveling across the country, visiting with veterans and their families in nearly all 50 states, and visiting veterans and our men and women in uniform living and serving overseas in Europe and in the Indo-Pacific. He lives by the words, believe in what you do and do what you believe in. Al is a great American, and it's a privilege for the Senate and the House to have him testifying today. And I would be remiss, Chairman and ranking members, if I didn't conclude by noting and honoring the tremendous record of bipartisanship, bipartisan commitment to veterans that has been a hallmark of the Veterans Affairs Committees in both chambers of Congress. And I know I speak for veterans in Georgia and people of all political persuasions today who are deeply alarmed by the unnecessary chaos that has been brought to the VA in Georgia and across the country in the last few weeks. And I humbly urge you to sustain that bipartisanship that's been a hallmark of your work and conduct the rigorous apolitical oversight that you're obligated to do, beginning today with hearing from these distinguished American heroes. Again, a pleasure to introduce my friend Al to the committee and chairman and ranking members. Thank you so much for the honor of being here today.
Senator Ossoff, thank you for your introduction of this great American and hero veteran. I hold in highest regard our veterans, and maybe slightly higher than that, veterans who serve other veterans. And clearly the description you gave of Al Lipphardt demonstrates he's that. So may I now recognize the 116th National Commander of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Al Lipphardt, for his testimony. Commander.
Thank you, Chairman Moran and Bost, ranking members Blumenthal and Takano, members of the Veterans Affairs Committee. It is my honor to testify today on behalf of more than 1.4 million members of the Veterans of Foreign Wars and its auxiliary, America's largest war veterans organization. While the benefits we afford our all-volunteer force may seem generous to those who've never served, these benefits are simply the warranty of the service contract each of us signed before we put on the uniform. In addition to the service members' obligations, each contract explicitly entitles service members to certain benefits as a result of honorable service. This is why the VFW calls on our nation to honor the contract. The basic enlistment contract reads, "My enlistment agreement is more than an employment agreement. It affects a change in status from civilian to military member of the armed forces." And one line that stands out on this contract: "As a member of the armed forces of the United States, I will be entitled to receive pay, allowances, and other benefits as provided by law and regulation." This is not charity. This is a contract. Everyone who served honorably, like every member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, met our end of this agreement. We demand our leaders do the same. By contract, you must ensure the VA has the resources and staff to provide veterans their full earned benefits. This is not an ask. Honor the contract. The historic passage of the PACT Act in 2022 provided health care and benefits to a tremendous number of veterans and survivors, some of whom had waited years for relief. The VFW is grateful to these committees for drafting and passing this critical legislation. The PACT Act is not the end of the journey for toxic exposed veterans and their survivors. This legislation was enacted to address health conditions related to burn pits and Agent Orange exposure. Just as important, the PACT Act included a framework for VA's evaluation of toxic exposures not included in the legislation. Veterans frequently tell the VFW about their health conditions resulting from exposure. The military is an inherently hazardous profession, and we must take care of our K-2 veterans, those who served at Fort McClellan, veterans exposed to radiation, forever chemicals, and others. The VFW urges Congress to conduct oversight of VA's presumptive process because veterans cannot keep waiting. The transition from military to civilian life is a critical moment. that requires active participation by both the Department of Defense and VA. Veterans can face difficult transitions, including housing insecurity, underemployment, and health concerns. We know that the first year from separation has the highest rate for suicide. VA currently includes accredited claims representatives in its portion of TAP classes, and the VFW leads the way in providing critical assistance on major installations across the country. The VFW urges Congress to pass legislation like the TAP Promotion Act to codify this practice, ensuring that service members receive their benefits at the earliest possible moment. Furthermore, the VFW believes that military commanders must prioritize transition services. The VFW urges Congress to establish an Undersecretary of Defense for transition. This position is essential for effective management and accountability. Improving transition has the potential to enhance recruitment and retention, lowers risk for suicide, and sets veterans on a path to success. Many veterans live with PTSD. VA most often provides antidepressants and other medications combined with therapy. Veterans are concerned the VA may be overprescribing these medications. While these treatments are successful for some individuals, many veterans report experiencing only temporary relief, adverse side effects, and difficulties when going off medications. Not all treatments work for all veterans, which is why the VFW is working with Grunt Style, urging Congress and VA to research and provide alternative, non-conventional solutions for veterans and break the cycle of over-medication. Treatments that have shown potential include HBOT, medical cannabis, MDMA, and other plant-based alternative therapies. The VFW believes there are additional ways to effectively treat PTSD. VA should receive funding to research and deliver those treatments today. Now on to our favorite subject, claim sharks. The VFW continues its fight against unaccredited, predatory claims consultants that we call claim sharks. Charging veterans for initial claims assistance is prohibited by law. Claim sharks often charge veterans the equivalent of 5 to 10 months of their future disability payments. This could put them in debt simply for trying to access their earned benefits. Some claim sharks obtain fraudulent medical opinions from their own providers, access veterans' login credentials for VA websites and call centers, which are egregious practices. Anyone who assists veterans with the preparation of VA claims should adhere to federal law. The VFW understands that some veterans are willing to pay for claims help, but these companies cannot be allowed to line their pockets with taxpayer dollars at the expense of disabled veterans. The VFW would support common sense legislation to require that everyone who charges veterans for claims is accredited. Veterans should never go into debt to access their earned benefits. The service of National Guard and Reserve members is still overlooked despite a stark increase in deployments since September the 11th, 2001. Though they have served alongside active duty service members, both domestic and abroad, they do not earn their VA education benefits at the same rate. This inequity has been amplified in recent years during the frequent activations due to natural disasters, the COVID-19 pandemic, and border security missions. The VFW urges Congress to pass the Guard and Reserve GI Bill Parity Act of 2025 to allow any day in uniform for which military pay is received to count towards post-9/11 GI Bill eligibility. This is a joint legislative priority for both the VFW and the Student Veterans of America. The current VFW SVA legislative fellows have advocated on their college campuses around the country to bring awareness to this issue. The time is long past for parity. This inequity must end now. For more than 2 decades, Congress has failed to address the longstanding injustice of withholding military retirement pay from disabled veterans. Retirement pay and disability compensation are separate benefits earned for different reasons. Congress continues to wrongly treat their concurrent receipt as double dipping. The VFW has advocated for the Major Richard Starr Act and other legislation to provide full concurrent receipt to all deserving veterans. Congress passed the Social Security Fairness Act in the last session, ending a similar unjust offset for Social Security recipients. It's time to correct this injustice for our military retirees. The VFW calls on Congress to fix this now. Lastly, I'd like to end with a solemn reminder of what is at stake when we go to war. I'd like to recognize 5 members of my unit with whom I served in Vietnam. Private Louis Sloan of East Point, Georgia. Corporal Kenneth Adams of Santa Barbara, California. Corporal Philip Adams of Croton Falls, New York. Private First Class Robert Waddell of Batavia, Ohio, and Corporal Rodney Loatman of Newark, New Jersey. I would ask these men to stand and be recognized, but they can't. Their names are on the Vietnam Wall, along with all those who gave the last full measure of devotion to this nation, acknowledged by the contract that we signed. They died on November the 23rd, 1967, Thanksgiving Day. Their names and the recognition of their supreme sacrifice must never be forgotten. Our nation must never forget our warfighters. This is why we persistently call for the full funding of DPA's mission, proper recognition of expeditionary American forces, deterring our enemies abroad, and proper support to overseas veterans who augment these critical missions. Chairman Moran and Boss, ranking members Blumenthal and Takano, members of the committees, thank you for the opportunity to discuss these important issues. My team and I are ready to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
National Commander, thank you for your thoughtful and solid testimony, your compelling testimony. We're now going to have that opportunity for us to ask you and your team questions. We're going to begin a round of 3-minute questions. I'll begin those questions by highlighting a couple of things that you said. The first question I was going to ask you about and am going to ask you about, you highlighted first, and that's the PACT Act. You highlighted that it was not a one-and-done deal and that there was more to come, and that there are veterans that are not yet receiving the benefits that some now are eligible for because the PACT Act requires further action by the Department of Veterans Affairs. We established a framework to make decisions regarding new presumptions of service connection in an attempt to make it easier for toxic exposed veterans to file for and receive disability compensation and access to VA health care. What are you hearing from VA and from veterans about this new presumptive decision process? What are you hearing about concerns from veterans whose conditions are not covered by presumption service connection or whose location or years of service are not included in the existing presumption? Would you please share that with me and the committee?
And thank you very much, sir. And I certainly, but I'd like for for Mike Figlioli from our National Veteran Service to more fully answer that in detail.
Mr. Figlioli.
Thank you, Commander-in-Chief. Thank you again for the passage of the PACT Act. And we have said before, it's a framework that needs to be looked at, needs to be updated, that needs to be kept up with. We are aware that some veterans are not covered by those provisions. We have attempted to engage VA. We had not really had many meaningful engagements about upcoming disabilities or presumptives that might be involved. We haven't been able to discuss with them the conditions that are being reported to us. There hasn't been much discussion about what conditions they plan to review related to any other exposure. We've seen Federal Register notices that have been published without stakeholder input, and there's been a severe lack of transparency from VA, which has been required by the PACT Act. So we are aware of other maladies, diseases. We keep hearing about these things that VA needs to consider, but they have been less than forthright in coming to the table.
Thank you for your testimony. It's something that we clearly, in cooperation with you, need to follow up to make sure the VA follows the law. Let me ask next about the Guard and Reserve GI Bill Parity Act, also which you highlighted, National Commander. I appreciate strong support of the VFW. Can you please go into any greater detail on why this bill is needed, what gaps in education benefits National Guards and Reserve components are currently experiencing, and how it impacts recruitment and retention?
Thank you very much again, sir. Well, I could answer that question for you. I'd rather turn it over to Ms. Keenan, who's our National Legislative Director, for more detail.
Ms. Keenan.
Thank you, Chief. I served in the National Guard myself, and even though I deployed twice, I only earned 60% of my post-9/11 GI Bill benefits. And we know that Guard and Reserve members are deploying more overseas, but also domestically to support natural disasters, border security, and other missions. And currently, a lot of that service does not count toward GI Bill eligibility. So we just want parity, that every day in uniform where a service member is receiving pay counts toward their eligibility for post-9/11 education benefits. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. I now recognize Chairman Bost.
Thank you, Chairman. Commander, last year, matter of fact, just before Congress was leaving town, VA reported a massive budget shortfall that claimed that would impact the delivery of benefits for our veterans. It scared our veterans, okay, around the nation. Now we know, though, that that was not the case. So moving forward, do you think it's necessary for VA to receive annual audits and report to Congress to prevent another claiming of a shortfall, scaring people? Do you think we need to do that?
Thank you very much, sir. And the answer to that question in one word is yes. But to answer it a little more fully, and then I'm going to ask Mr. Murray to follow up, we need to ensure that the VA is fully funded and fully staffed. That needs to be taken care of first.
So, Chairman Bost, we're very appreciative of Congress stepping in to take care of that emergency funding when needed. However, it turns out it might not have been. We fully support transparency from VA and making sure that our taxpayer dollars are being accounted for properly.
Thank you. Commander, for veterans suffering from substance use disorder, admitting they need help and showing up is the foundational moment in the road to recovery. Do you think the VA currently community care process enables VA to get them into the immediate treatment that they need?
Thank you very much, sir. I'm going to ask Pat to give you more detail, and then I'd like to follow it up.
So simply no. The Access Act and the Elizabeth Dole Home Care Act had a provision to help try to address that. We want to make sure that when veterans are brave enough to step up and ask for help, there's someone there to answer the phone. There's someone there to take care of that and not send them away or make them wait months, drive far too long. All those things will hopefully save veterans' lives.
So then I'll follow up with that, because the passage of H.R. 740, the Veterans Access Act of 2025, would eliminate that red tape. Do you agree that?
We hope so.
Thank you. Commander, VA must be held accountable for care and benefits that our veterans receive. We would also like to see the committee conduct more oversight of the department to drive improved services to our veterans. Would you like to see that?
In a word, sir, absolutely.
Thank you. We want to thank you for being here today, and I will yield back. I will yield back, and I will yield to Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say very enthusiastically I support the goals of the GUARD Act. I've been working and fighting for it. Likewise, the parity legislation that is so important to our Reserve and National Guard, they should be treated equally. There's no question that it's a matter of fairness. Chief Lipphardt, you referred to that contract that we made. When anyone in this room went into the service, they raised their right hand and they swore allegiance to the Constitution and laws of the United States. That contract is legally binding on the United States of America, on this Congress. And we owe it to our veterans to keep our promises and follow the law. And that is why I am so angry and disappointed that the VA is firing workers who are integral to implementing the PAC Act and terminating contracts that are essential to provide those benefits under the PAC Act. Would you agree with me that those workers and contracts should be reinstated so that the PAC Act is made fully available on a timely basis to every veteran deserving of care and benefits because of their toxic exposure?
Thank you very much, Senator. And we certainly agree that the contract must be honored. We deployed when ordered. We served. When I was wounded in Vietnam, I was wounded in the neck and the arm, left arm was shrapnel. But instead of just taking my arm off, the medics took the time to just pick out the pieces. That's the way that we need to be addressing these issues. It needs to be with a scalpel and not just a saw. We must take time to look at what's happening, who it's happening to. So, yes, I do.
I think that is a very, very powerful statement of the way waste should be eliminated in the VA, not with a meat axe, but with a surgeon's scalpel, cautiously and carefully. And right now, my fear is that veterans are regarded as trash on the road to some waste removal indiscriminately and draconian actions that, in fact, involve taking off the VA's arm in the name of eliminating waste and abuse, in fact, creating bigger costs as a result. I have two sons who've served, one in the Marine Corps in Afghanistan, the other is a Navy SEAL, and I worry about the VA being there for them, for our young people, for our future generation. And I know the VFW is seeking to attract more younger veterans, and I think your powerful advocacy is going to be a beacon for them. I thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, sir. And again, veterans are not numbers. We're people. We're people that put ourselves out there to take this, to secure this nation. And we deserve to have the VA fully funded, fully staffed, so we can receive the best care available, period. So thank you again, Senator.
Thank you.
Ranking Member Takano, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commander Lipphardt, as I mentioned in my opening, I applaud VFW's statement calling for an end to the indiscriminate firing of federal employees, especially veterans, who make up roughly a third of the federal workforce. I'm worried that these haphazard cuts and discriminate cuts are going to have on the immediate and long-lasting impact on veterans. And it seems like it's fire first, analyze after. Cancel contracts first, analyze after. I commit to working with you and other VSOs willing to stand with us to undo these illegal and unconscionable firings. So, Commander Lipphardt, recently VA announced the termination of $2 billion worth of contracts, and one of those contracts was the program office at VA tasked with the implementation of the PACT Act. How important is the PACT Act and toxic exposures to the VFW?
Senator Takano, military service is inherently dangerous. I think we could all agree on that. One of the dangers is exposure to toxins. I'd like to take this moment to ask our members in the audience to stand up if any of them have been exposed to toxins at any point during their military career.
Wow.
There's your answer. As you saw, our members, as you saw from our members, this issue is very important to us. These are the men and women who place themselves between the weapons of our enemies and these shores. We need to be cared for. Thank you.
Wow. All I can say is we owe you to honor the contract, to honor the pact.
Thank you, sir.
I'm very sad to see so many affected, but this highlights the importance of the PACT Act and why we cannot allow the Cost of War Toxic Exposure Fund to be dismantled. We owe it to these veterans to ensure that the funding to care for them will always be available. Commander, as I mentioned in my opening, I applaud VFW's statement calling for the end to the indiscriminate firing of federal employees. I am worried that these haphazard cuts, well, I already did that. You highlighted the results of VA's last survey on the VA healthcare that show that veterans are still overwhelmingly preferring to get their care from VA when available. I absolutely agree that there's a time and a place for community care, and I'm concerned that continued growth in its utilization is having a catastrophic impact on VA's direct care budget. What can Congress do to protect VA's direct provision of care where available?
The key is consistency of care, and I'm going to ask Mr. Murray to expound on that.
Mr. Takano, we support community care as VA care. We believe it is a necessary supplement to VA care. We'd never want that to supplant VA care, though. What we want is consistency. when veterans do need to access community care, like our members from Senator Hassan's state, New Hampshire, are all automatically eligible for community care because they don't have those facilities. So when veterans need to access it, they expect consistency. They expect to be told up front what to expect. That's what we want with our community care. Not necessarily more, we want it to be better.
Congresswoman Radwagen, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Commander Lipphardt, in VFW's testimony, you mentioned inconsistencies in service members reporting to TAP on time. Can you please expand on the barriers service members face when trying to go through the TAP program?
Thank you, ma'am. And I'd like to ask Ms. Keenan to expound.
Thank you for the question. We've heard from veterans that say that they were not able to get to TAP on time because of mission readiness. So not all service members have the ability to choose when they have their free time because of the mission. So we want to be able to ensure that commanders at DoD take transition seriously, that there's some accountability, and that they can get all of their service members who are leaving, and 80% of the force leaves before retirement. Make sure they get to those transition courses and that they get there on time.
Commander Lipphardt, how can this committee best support veterans to ensure they have the opportunities and resources to maintain meaningful employment?
Thank you, ma'am, for the question. We need to codify that contract.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Senator Hassan, you're recognized for 3 minutes for your question.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you and Chairman Moran and our ranking members for this hearing. I want to acknowledge and thank all the veterans who are here today, especially those from the Granite State. My dad was a World War II veteran who survived the Bulge, so I try to make sure that I honor his memory as best as I can in my work here. And Commander Lipphardt, thank you for testifying here today and for your military service. I'll add my thanks to those of Senator Blumenthal for your advocacy for veterans, especially those who are federal employees. The recent mass layoffs within the federal government have a direct impact on both the veterans who have lost their jobs as well as on the service that they provide to our citizens, including to our other veterans. And to your point about honoring contracts, we talk about honoring veterans. The best way we can do that is with actions and not words, which means keeping our commitment. Just as you all kept your commitment to our country, the country needs to keep its commitment to all of you, and I'm committed to doing that. And I'll add, my dad would have said, that when a country begins ignoring contracts or laws, it begins to lose its freedom. And so I thank you all for fighting for freedom, and we all have to be together in this pursuit of maintaining it. Commander, I had 2 questions for you. As has been discussed, your written testimony discusses the VFW's most recent health survey, which showed that veterans prefer using VA medical facilities, but they have concerns about appointment availability and travel distance to VA facilities. I've been working with Senator Bozeman on a bipartisan bill to help address this very issue, and I want to thank the VFW for their support of this bill. Under the VA's current process, it can be difficult for veterans to coordinate all of their appointments for the same day, something that's especially important for rural veterans who may have to travel long distances to receive their care. So this bill that Senator Bozeman and I have would ensure that veterans can view available VA appointments and fully schedule them in one easy step, either by going online or placing one call. Can you please discuss the importance of making sure veterans have easy, reliable access to VA-provided care?
Thank you for the question, ma'am, and I'm going to ask Pat Murray.
Thank you.
Murray?
Ma'am, in an ideal world, veterans can access care at VA facility all in one shot, right? Be able to go to your primary care, be able to stop by, an orthopedics appointment, then be able to swing by the pharmacy on the way out. That's in an ideal world. That is tough to do, to try to schedule all that in one. Our ask, though, is in developing this scheduling tool to the best extent possible, to buy it instead of try to develop their own.
I hear
Because
you.
VA's IT development is not good.
I hear you, and I thank you. And Mr. Chair, with just one other quick point, I want to highlight the work that the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency does. For those who don't know, this agency works to repatriate and identify American service members who've gone missing. Solemn work to show that Americans never leave a fallen comrade behind. The agency has accounted for almost 3,500 missing Americans since 1973. And I will submit a question for the record, but as the administration is looking at cutting the Pentagon's budget, I am concerned that the mission of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency could be undermined or hampered, and I hope we can all come together to prevent that from happening. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Congressman Hammond, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, thank you to our distinguished guests from the Veterans of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Wars. As a fellow veteran, I deeply appreciate your organization's vital work in ensuring we fulfill our promises to those who have sacrificed so much for our country. Today, I've been particularly interested in discussing how we can improve access to quality health care for veterans, especially those in suburban and rural areas within Arizona. We must ensure that all veterans, regardless of where they live, have timely access to the care and benefits they've earned. I appreciate your insights on these critical issues and how Congress can better support the VFW's mission to serve veterans. Now, Commander, the VFW has been a strong advocate for concurrent receipt. Can you elaborate on how the current offset between military retired pay and VA disability compensation impacts veterans?
Thank you very much, sir, for the question. And it's not a compatible thing. That it seems like that we're combining the retirement pay with compensation. Retirement pay is for retirement. Compensation is for those service-connected disabilities that we've incurred as a result of our service. They are two separate, distinct things. And the time is now to stop. It needs to be separated.
I agree. And what specific legislation do you ask Congress to support regarding it?
I'm going to ask Mr. Murray for the specifics.
Will you start by passing the Richard Starr Act? There are other parts of concurrent receipt that need to be addressed as well, including those who have lower than a 50% disability rating, those who received separation pay from their services. Those are all being offset by current VA disability compensation plans. We want to eliminate all those, but Major Richard Starr Act would be a good start. 75% of Congress co-sponsored that last year, and it never saw a single vote. We need to stop that, put it on the floor, pass it, get it to the president's desk.
Very good. And Commander, I know you alluded to earlier with the PACT Act, but what feedback has the VFW gotten from veterans about their experiences accessing the newly expanded benefits in health care?
Our National Veterans Service Director, Mike Figlioli, sir, if you'd please respond to that.
Thank you, Commander-in-Chief. Thank you for the question. Like VA, there continues to be challenges with wait times, access, scheduling, traveling to and from facilities. Generally, veterans are comfortable with the PACT Act, but those challenges still remain. We still got to invest in IT systems that allow people access to handle their own case management, allow them to get into the facilities quicker, and make sure that everything is fully staffed and fully funded.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Congressman Pappas, you have 3 minutes for questions.
Well, thank you very much, Commander. Thank you for your testimony. I want to welcome all the veterans who are here today. This is an impressive show of force, not just for VFW, but for veterans all across our country. And I want to give a special shout out to any veterans from the Live Free or Die state of New Hampshire who are joining us here. I was really glad, Commander. Oh, there we got a couple back there. All right. Commander, I was really glad that you mentioned the Guard VA Benefits Act, which, as we know, would reinstate criminal penalties for these claim sharks who are charging unauthorized fees for assisting veterans with their claims. I have to say, we have educated our colleagues on this issue. You have. We have gained a significant number of co-sponsors on a bipartisan basis for this bill. This is going to be the Congress where we get this across the finish line. We've got the claim sharks on the run. Let's finish the job. Thank you for your help in that regard and your leadership. It's so important. I wanted to ask about another issue. You mentioned about breaking the cycle of over-medication and mentioned a number of alternative therapies that I think are groundbreaking for veterans to improve quality of life and outcomes. One thing that I hear from veterans is about the benefit of alternative therapies like acupuncture and massage therapy that can be really game-changing in terms of alleviating physical pain. But we know that therapy providers face obstacles due to VA reimbursement policies that sometimes limit their ability to care for veterans. So I'm wondering if you could discuss the need to be able to focus on alternative therapies like massage therapy and the difference that that can make for veterans.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask our National Legislative Director, or Chair. We're very lucky to have him on the panel today. He is very, very knowledgeable in this area, to include his work with grunt style. So I'd like to ask Mr. Fuller, please take that.
Thank you, Commander Chief and Congressman. Thank you for the question. And you mentioned three great alternatives. And many veterans suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and physical injuries. If PTSD is not treated, the effects can be detrimental in many ways, including risk of homelessness, substance abuse, relationship problems, financial instability, difficulties in transitioning back to civilian life, or even the worst case, suicide. Veterans show a willingness to confront mental health challenges with the alternative treatments that you mentioned, and we're also advocating for more access to other alternative modalities so we can address our own unique mental and physical health challenges. These include psychedelics such as MDMA, psilocybin, and ibogaine, ketamine infusion, and cannabis, which includes medical marijuana and hemp-derived consumables, which were made legal by the 2018 Federal Farm Bill. Our ask here is simple. We ask the VA to give veterans every option in the toolbox. Move beyond merely studying the effectiveness of these tools, and if they work, and we're confident that they do, start executing the implementation of these options. The pharmaceutical cocktail is as the lone default option causes harm for many of us in this room and those that are watching. This must end. Our lives are at stake.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. And Commander, you said it, not all treatments work for all veterans. And we've got to be working together on an evidence-based approach to make sure we're opening doors of opportunity for veterans to get the care that works for them. I yield back my time.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Tuberville, you are now recognized for 3 minutes for your questions.
Oh, thank you very much. And thanks to all the veterans here for your service, especially those traveling from Alabama. We got anybody from Alabama here? We got to get louder than that. Come on. Also, all the veteran service organizations, thanks for what you do. A lot of times your work goes unnoticed. You know, our VA operates the largest healthcare system in the United States and is one of the largest systems in the world. And as a member of these committees, we must ensure our veterans are receiving the best around the world. Now, we have got to get rid of the fraud, and we got to get rid of the waste. I know President Trump's taken a hit from a lot of people, but folks, we're not going to have a country if we don't get this mess all straightened out. We are in trouble. Our veterans are going to be in trouble if we don't get this straightened out. We've got to get it going in the right direction. Commander, You mentioned in your testimony dissatisfaction among veterans with the community care referral process. I, too, am very dissatisfied. I get more calls on that than anybody. We're 60% rural in the state of Alabama, and we have almost 500,000 veterans. The red tape is disastrous. Veterans must cut through this red tape, and we need to be provided community care. Would you say your members receive mental health care more frequently through the VA directly or the community care network, Mr. Commander?
For a more complete answer, sir, I'm going to ask Pat.
Okay.
Mr. Murray.
Yeah, and that one, Senator, we'll take for the record and get back to you. We actually don't know the breakdown of the mental health care they receive in the community versus at VA, but we would be more than happy to learn more about that. I believe there's a bill coming up at the Senate Veteran Affairs Committee next week that looks to maybe address that.
Well, Mr. Murray, let me ask you this. If a veteran gets denied community care, what is your advice to these veterans if they get denied community care and are told, hey, you got to drive 3 hours to a VA? What is your advice to them?
My advice would be to urge that if they are eligible for community care based on drive time or wait time access, to press that issue, because that is what the Mission Act put in place. That
Exactly.
is the law. We want VA to adhere to the law. When applicable, community care is incredibly helpful. So if a veteran will receive better care through the community, if instead of driving 3 hours, for example, then yes, we want that to be the case.
Yeah, there's no doubt. In a lot of states, community care is going to have to be a necessity because veterans can't drive for hours and hours. Commander Lipphardt, in your testimony, you mentioned the importance of veterans having accessible treatments. I've got a bill on the floor, hyperbaric chambers, where veterans can use a hyperbaric chamber. I am being fought at every turn. What is your thought on that?
Thank you very much, Senator. I'm going to send it back to Ms. Fuller.
Thank you.
Senator, as you may have heard me say earlier, we advocate for all alternatives like the hyperbaric oxygen chamber, and which is proven to be effective treatment for traumatic brain injury, PTSD, and tissue regeneration, which can prevent amputations. It is proven very effective, and I would bet you have a good understanding of TBI and CTE as a former football coach.
Exactly.
I mean, so it is effective, and it's something that we will advocate for.
It helps football players. It helps anybody with concussions.
Yes, sir.
And it damn sure would help veterans, and we need to get that done.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
I just would like to add one thing to that, and it's kind of a general for all our conversations this morning. I don't think there's any group of people that appreciates effort more than a member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Actually, all veterans appreciate effort. But you know, it is achievement that we can celebrate. Until it's done, it ain't done. And we have got to get it done.
Representative Morrison, you are now recognized for 3 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commander Lipphardt, and all the witnesses for being here to testify today. I just want to start by saying, as the daughter-in-law of a disabled Vietnam veteran and the wife of an Army combat veteran, I want to offer my profound gratitude to every veteran in this room. Last week, I received the devastating news that the VA's mass firings hit the Minneapolis VA, which serves veterans in my district. My team and I have heard some truly gut-wrenching stories about employees who are terminated, combat veterans, disabled veterans, people who put their lives on the line to defend our country, people who may not have served but were honored to work for those who did. All of them terminated without cause through no fault of their own. In my view, there are two big problems here. First, the impact on VA's ability to deliver care and benefits to our veterans. The Minneapolis VA is already dealing with staffing shortages. The last thing we should be doing is firing people for no good reason. And as a doctor, let me tell you, the whole team plays a role in optimizing the delivery of care, from the provider to the facilities workers to the person who greets the veteran at the door. My second point is one that I think we need to be talking about more. Veterans make up a tiny percentage of the population, but 30% of our federal workforce are veterans. So if you slash 1,000 federal jobs, odds are you're putting about 300 veterans out of work. And at the VA, we're talking about firing veterans who made the conscious decision to serve their fellow veterans after serving their country. So regardless of whether or not you agree with the wave of terminations we're seeing across the federal government, I think it's clear that these actions will disproportionately harm veterans, which is incredibly troubling to me. So Commander Lipphardt, my first question for you is simple. Do you think firing thousands of VA employees will be helpful or harmful for your members?
With all due respect, ma'am, it's gonna kill us. Of course, it's going to impact us. To me, there's nothing more sacred than taking care of those who have served this nation, who stopped their own lives to give service to this nation. And it's got to be fixed. It's got to be fixed. While we have 1.4 million members, those are our members. That's not who we represent. We represent 18 million veterans. Yeah. All veterans. All veterans need to be respected, need to be treated with respect. They've been honorably discharged. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Sir, if you'd allow me one more brief question. I can say confidently that preventing veteran suicide is a top priority of every member here today, House and Senate, Democrat and Republican. We know that access to mental health care is essential, but can you share a little bit more about how transition assistance and housing access can also have a role to play in eliminating veteran suicide?
Thank you, ma'am. I'm going to ask Pat, because he's got, Mr. Murray, because he's got some examples of what's happening.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Commander. Ma'am, we know that there's more to combating veteran suicide than simply mental health appointments. We've heard too often that at VA it's their #1 clinical priority. It needs to be their #1 priority, period. We are very focused on also the benefits that can help alleviate that, including housing. Things like a roof over your head, food on your table, being gainfully employed, money in your wallet can be preventers to help veterans from starting to take that negative slide and ultimately make a fatal final decision. So housing is one of the key components that we see as keeping veterans, not just from dying by suicide, but helping launch them forward for success. That's really what we want to focus on, making veterans the best American that they can be.
Thank you very much. And shout out to any Minnesota vets out there.
Chair now recognizes Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and commanders, veterans, great to see you. Last year, I retired after 30 years on active duty and in the reserves in the United States Marine Corps. So I knew that would get a shout out. So I'm now joining another esteemed group of Americans and Alaskans. I'm officially a United States veteran. I love that. I'm a proud member of VFW Post 9785 in Eagle River, Alaska. Now, I know my fellow Alaskans, we travel far for these meetings. I know we have some here. I hope they're in the audience. Any Alaskans? By the way, Alaska has more veterans per capita than any state in the country. Do I have some of my fellow Alaska veterans in the audience? How about a round of applause for them traveling the furthest way, maybe with the exception of Hawaii.
Senator Sullivan, with all due respect, you have 3 minutes time.
I'm just very happy to see everybody. Let me begin by an issue that I know the VFW, the American Legion have all really supported. And I just want to thank you, but I want you to keep an eye on it. This is the Camp Lejeune Act that passed. You're seeing ads on TV, relentless ads. They're not helpful ads, because we passed that act to help sick Marines and their families from Camp Lejeune. And the TV ads are all these law firms that are charging 60 to 70% contingency fees to take the money from the sick Marine families and put it in their pockets. That's one of the most disgusting things I've seen in my 10 years in the U.S. Senate. Commander, can I just get your commitment, working with all the VSOs, the Department of Justice and others, to not allow that to happen where these law firms were doing these ads, billions of dollars of ads, by the way, not to help Marines, but to take their money. Can I get your commitment to, the law firms will get paid a certain degree, but not 60 and 70% contingency fees. That's highway robbery. Commander, can I get your commitment on that? Staying with us?
Absolutely. The
Good.
VFW is committed.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. You got to take care of sick Marines and their families, not law firms that don't need the extra money. One final question I have. I know it matters to a number of my colleagues. Senator King and I are actually working on legislation with Senator Kramer that we're going to be introducing soon called Supporting Rural Veterans Access to Health Care Services. In big states like ours that are very rural, our veterans who live in rural communities have a harder time accessing their services, but they have earned their benefits just like anyone who lives in a big city. So can we work with the VFW once we introduce it to get your support on this bill that really tries to emphasize making sure every veteran, whether you live in a big city or a small little community in rural Alaska or rural Maine, gets the benefits that they've earned. Can I get your commitment to work with the VFW on this important bill?
Absolutely, sir. We will certainly be honored to work with you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sullivan, thank you, and thank you for your service. Now, Representative Conaway.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a veteran myself, I want to, hailing from New Jersey, I want to express my gratitude for you, Mr. Lipphardt, for your testimony, for your colleagues here who have offered valuable information to this committee to help our deliberations. As members of Congress, it is our responsibility to ensure that every veteran receives high-quality medical care and mental health services. Now, we heard today you don't leave a comrade in the field, and I fear that across many administrations we've been doing exactly that, and it's shameful and it needs to end. I would add, we don't leave an ally in the field either, and sadly we are seeing that as well. Increased enrollment in VA care, it's important that we prioritize equipping our medical facilities with tools and technology of the 21st century so that veterans can get the care they richly deserve. We've heard about council contracts. We've heard about mass firings across various facilities in our country. And as a practical physician myself, I cannot help and worked in hospitals for much of my career. I understand fully well how important it is that a team is there and ready and willing to take care of those who present themselves for care. And we know that many veterans, particularly as they're leaving the service, suffer from PTSD, might have experienced military sexual trauma, anxiety and stress, and other mental health and addictive disorders, just to name a few. What is your thought about the shortfalls that we are seeing in health services for our veterans? Do you agree with me that we are seeing shortfalls, and are there particular things that you'd like to see the VA do in respect to those deficiencies?
Thank you very much, sir. And again, for a more detailed answer, I'm kind of a big picture guy. I'm not the detail guy. So I'm going to ask Mr. Murray.
So always travel with one. That's a good idea.
Mr. Murray.
Thank you, Chief. Sir, we've already heard for many years that VA has been struggling to fill all of its vacancies. There are tens of thousands of open positions that VA cannot fill. What we've seen in the past few weeks is the indiscriminate firing of people, not for performance, but simply because they're in a probationary status. In order to get those services that veterans have earned, it needs to be a fully staffed and fully funded VA. There are examples all across the country. In fact, we're joined here by Mike Slater, who gave us this picture at the Vet Center in Springfield, Massachusetts. Due to abrupt and unplanned staff shortages, we are not able to greet you at this time. If you have a scheduled appointment, your counselor will be out to get you at the time of your appointment. If you were here for any other reason, please call and leave a message. We apologize for this impact on your care. That's reducing services for veterans. Vet centers are critical points of contact for VA. If we want to improve services, we've got to make sure that people are there to actually answer the phones and greet them at the door when they show up for that care.
And yet we've seen the indiscriminate cancellation of contract design to make sure that we're recruiting healthcare providers into VA care. And of course, as we've heard, and I think a pin needs to be put in this, if you cancel contracts and nor statutes and nor constitutional mandates, then you don't have your freedom. And we've got to make sure that that stops. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank you, veterans.
Senator Ono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am glad to join my colleagues from both the House and Senate today, and it's good to see all of the veterans out there. I think every state is represented from what I heard in the time that I've been here, but of course I want to acknowledge, I hope the presence of the people from Hawaii, I hope you're still out there. Yay, okay. You deserve to get a shout out. You know, each of us sits on a number of committees. I sit on 5, but one thing about the Veterans Committee is that we each have a commitment to listen to and working with the veterans to be of assistance. So I can't say that about every committee that I sit on, but this is one committee where we are united in wanting to be of service to all of you who have been of service to our country. So we have, through so much of the advocacy that you have presented to us, made some major legislation. Most recently, of course, the PACT Act, but we have the Dole Act, we've had the Isaacson-Roe Act. We've had a number of very significant pieces of legislation that have served to help veterans, and that is so much because of your advocacy and your continuing pointing out to us that more needs to be done in terms of, for example, the area of PTSD care, suicide, women veterans. Women veterans, yes, finally acknowledging that women veterans should have care that is very specialized to them. So thank you very much. We are in the midst of thousands of people getting fired. And as mentioned, every group that gets fired because right now they happen to be in probationary status includes a lot of veterans. And so it is not just the VA that fired most recently 1,400 people who are on probationary status, but you have the DOD, Department of Defense, you have the Department of Justice. Thousands of people are getting fired, not because of any indication of a fraud or waste, but indiscriminate firing. So there is chaos and fear all across the country. At the moment, this is not the way to run a government. This is certainly no way to treat federal workers, of whom many are veterans. And at the same time that 1,400 people from VA were fired, we get a notice that some 300,000 job openings need to be filled at the VA. And in Hawaii, just in Hawaii, in our system, we have 5,000 vacancies. Now, there are a lot of other departments that have had to deal with a hiring freeze, but because of the hue and cry and the need for the veterans, the hiring freeze was lifted for the VA. But we're talking about hundreds of thousands of vacancies. The word crazy comes to mind. So as we continue to work with you, I just want you all to know that as so many of us have been here to reinforce our commitment to work with you, I will continue to do so, because obviously there is a lot more that needs to be done. And I want to thank the chairs of both the House and Senate committees for this hearing, and each one of you, and Commander, thank you so much for coming here with your team. Aloha.
Senator Ono, thank you. And I recognize Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think it's been noted yet that this hearing happens to fall on a very appropriate day. The only day of the year that's a military command, March 4th. And we should be marching forth on the GUARD Act, on the Richard Starr Act, and on protecting our veterans that work for the United States government. Marching forth. I want to, go ahead, Mr. Commander.
I was just going to say thank you for your invitation to come back.
Yes, sir. Anytime.
We remember 1930.
Anytime. These staffing cuts, now we've talked about 1,400. Actually, there have been 2,400 firings at the VA, but then there was the hiring freeze, which left a couple of thousand places open. So we're really down 5,000 people in the last month at the VA. And here's how random it is. First they were going to have the hiring freeze apply to doctors and nurses, and then they said, oh no, those are direct care workers. We're going to exempt them. If nobody's there to answer the phone when a veteran calls for an appointment, that's a denial of benefits.
Yes, sir.
And I think the point's been made, about 30% of federal employees are veterans. So when you see a headline that says 1,000 people fired at the CIA or wherever it is, that's 300 veterans. In our hospital in Togus in Maine, we just had 7 people laid off, 5 were veterans. That's a hell of a way to treat somebody who's put their life on the line for this country.
Absolutely.
So the other piece that you ought to realize, they say they're firing people who are on probation, and probation meaning go to work in the last year or two. In the federal government, if you're promoted, you're on probation. So you can have somebody that's worked for an agency for the VA for 10 years, they get promoted, they happen to be on probation, and they're getting fired. And I hate the picture of that guy with the chainsaw laughing about firing people from our government. In fact, you put it really well in your statement. I love it. You said, I was wounded in combat during Vietnam. I'm thankful that medics who treated me chose not to take my whole arm for the sake of efficiency. It took a trained eye, a skillful hand, and human intuition to fix me up and get me back in the fight. Here's the quote. In my experience, those operating with a scalpel have a better chance of saving limbs than those who operate with a chainsaw. Thank you, Mr. Commander, for making that statement. Another point is transition. In my view, we should be putting as much money, time, and effort into the transition out as we do on the recruiting in.
Yes, sir.
That is a real disservice to veterans.
Absolutely.
And finally, my wife says I say finally too much, it gets people's hopes up. But finally, your voice is more important right now than perhaps it's ever been. We need to hear from the veterans of America. They need to speak up about what's going on and how we protect those who, as I said, when they signed up for their job, put their lives on the line for this country. So thanks to the VFW. Thanks for your advocacy. Keep at it. We need you.
Senator, thank you. Thank you very much. And please know that the Veterans of Foreign Wars has changed the direction. We are moving forward. You are going to hear from us, and you're going to see us a lot more. So thank you.
Senator King, thank you. Senator Banks is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for being here. As the only Hoosier on the House or Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, the work that goes on in this committee is so important, but we can't do our job without the help of all of you. So on behalf of all the Hoosiers in the room, it's an honor to represent you, and all of the fellow veterans who are here, thank you for your important work. Commander, I'm new to the Senate. I served in the House for 8 years. I served on the House committee for 6 of those 8 years. I'm rolling up my sleeves, and I'm getting to work on a lot of issues important to veterans and all of you. So real quickly, I'm preparing to reintroduce legislation that I worked on in the House to refund certain veterans their Montgomery GI Bill contributions who later became eligible for the post-9/11 GI Bill. Is that something we can work on together?
In a word, sir, absolutely. And I'd like to call on Ms. Keenan for some detail. Again,
Great.
legislation.
Very good.
Ms. Keenan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. We're happy to work with your office to look at that. And that kind of money back for student veterans can be really beneficial at a critical time where they're going to need that funding. So love the idea and happy to work with your office. Thank you.
Very good. Secondly, Commander, I'm also working on legislation to make sure that veterans can always be buried with their spouses. regardless of what kind of burial they choose. Is that something we can work on together as well?
Again, sir, thank you very much, and the answer is absolutely.
I look forward to that, and I appreciate that very much. Commander, the VA has been cooperating with nonprofit mental health organizations and public-private partnerships to prevent veteran suicides. Since Congress passed the Commander John Scott Hannon Act that you all were such a big part of helping us get over the finish line, and other legislation, what results have we seen from those efforts, and how can we expand them?
Thank you very much, sir, and I'm going to ask Pat to respond for the specifics.
Thank you, Chief. Senator Banks, we know that some of those community connections, whether it's with mental health or whether it's with transition, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's what we want to see, because they're the folks that are in the community that know these things. VA can do a great job for a lot of these, but they can't do it for everything. We want to really focus, put resources into some of those great organizations in the community that can really affect change. The Commander John Scott Hannon Act provided that. We want to make sure that those connections, those contracts, and that funding stay in place for that critical mission.
Very good. My last question, Mr. Commander. The VA has been resistant to new approaches when it comes to leasing and construction. It takes the VA about 5 years to lease a clinic and 10 to 20 years to build a new hospital. Similar to the innovation in mental health, how do you think that the VA should be partnering with local governments and private healthcare systems to develop new medical facilities?
Again, sir, thank you very much, and I'm going to, again, ask Pat to respond.
Thank you, Commander. Senator, VA construction is behind. If you look at the $130 billion worth of backlog, there's a lot that needs to be done. They need to figure out more dynamic ways to do that, like the private sector does. If you look at other major health systems like Kaiser, they put 3% of their operating budget into their infrastructure. VA is closer to 1%. There are certain things you can do to move the process along so you're not designing, then bidding, then building. There's an integrated way you can do that. It'll hopefully shorten the length of the overall construction contracts. But we need to make sure that VA also has proper staffing at central office for those the project management positions. We often talk about doctors and nurses, but there are people that oversee the building of VA facilities. They need some help there as well.
I agree. I look forward to working on that with you and all those other issues. Thank you again for being here. God bless. I yield back.
Senator Banks, thank you. Senator Gallegos.
Thank you. And Senator Banks, I would join you because I'm one of those veterans actually that got paid into the GI but never used the modern GI Bill, so you got a co-sponsor there. Thank you again for Veterans of Foreign War for being here.
There you go.
Look at that. Things get done.
Hey, no problem solved.
I'm glad my dues are going to something like this. I'm a member of Chapter 720 in Scottsdale, so thank you again for everything you do. Honestly, I am concerned. Like the guys I serve with are relatively young. You know, we were in Iraq in 2005. They're in their early 40s. Many of them committed their lives to service. They left the war and then came back, and they were working for different parts, whether it's DOD, VA, and other parts of the government, and they're scared. They feel like they're being disrespected. They passed up good lucrative careers in the private sector because they wanted to have a mission-oriented job that was still in service to the country. And now, you know, some of them are questioning about whether they're going to be able to pay the rent if something goes bad, or the mortgage. And the fact that veterans are being treated this way in such a disrespectful manner by, you know, the guy with the chainsaw and a bunch of 20-year-old kids that probably have never served or even gotten close to a weapon ever in their lives really scares the heck out of me. So I really encourage, obviously, us to worry about our veterans that are being serviced in the VA. But when 30% of the workforce is veterans, and we know, at least from my experience coming back from the war, the thing that was the most stabilizing for me coming back with PTSD was that I was able to get a job right away. But the fact that 30% of our workforce is potentially in danger of getting fired, you could really put these men and women into a very hard situation. But more to the VA, Commander Lipphardt, what concerns do your members have about the way these cuts are being handled? And what would you ask those making these types of staffing and budget decisions to take into account before acting on VA cuts or layoffs, or even just like the reprogramming of contracts that are very important for veterans and veteran outreach and suicide hotlines?
Thank you very much, sir. I'm going to ask a member of the panel here who I believe shared the same dirt that you did while you were deployed, and that's Mr. Murray.
So, thank you, Chief.
Mr. Murray.
Senator, I believe we probably just crossed paths where there are no six.
Yeah.
You have our commitment to make sure that these cuts, these firings are stopped. We often care about veteran unemployment. If we don't care about veterans not having jobs, then what are the veterans of foreign wars doing here? That's something that we have to make sure stays in place, because while every position may not be deemed essential, per government shutdown rules, they're very important positions, as we highlighted, just people who answer the phone.
Mm-hmm.
We need to make sure that these veterans are gainfully employed, and the ones who are high performers are not let go indiscriminately.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cassidy.
Hey, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Happy Mardi Gras for my people from Louisiana, and for everybody who wishes you were from Louisiana, if only on Mardi Gras Day. Mr. Lipphardt, in your testimony, you talked about how investing in technology can help with the backlog for veteran benefit applications. Way back when, multiple secretaries ago, I remember asking him something, and he said the main point we should be about is the veteran. And so with that spirit, I've thought about how AI could take a stack of papers required for someone's application for you name it. In 5 minutes, it's done everything that has to be done for a human to sit there and review it intelligently. Wouldn't that be great? Because I think I've learned that it can take up to 40 days for the VA claims management system to simply register a new claim submission. If 40 days is shrunk to 5 minutes or 30 seconds, how much better is it for the veteran? That's kind of where I'm coming at this from. And by the way, we know that if you miss the deadline, then everything starts over. And so if you can catch the deadline, even if you suddenly realize that there's something else you have to add, and it can just quickly put it back in, how much better for the veteran? Is there anything else? And I'm struck, I don't mean to offend you, but you might be like the oldest guy on the panel. So I'm struck that maybe the oldest guy is the one who's talking about using tech in order to make things work better for the veteran. What other ideas do you have, or anyone else has, how we can do this so that we can kind of channel it into our conversations with Secretary Collins to maybe up the game?
I thank you very much, sir. And I guess my first comment relative to that is that it's 2025. Technology is here. We need to use technology. That's how we're going to move ahead. The Department of Defense has implemented it. It's about time that the Veterans Administration adds it. I'd like for Pat to be a little more specific.
Mr. Murray.
Mr. Figlioli, thank you. Thank you, Commander-in-Chief. Senator, we are looking at AI. We understand its value, and its processing times will be reduced for claims, especially when VA is processing more claims than ever. VA is using AI in some areas already for certain disabilities. Looking at that evidence, trying to get that claim granted as quickly as possible. So it's not out of the question. It's here, as the Commander-in-Chief said. It's the way of the world. Very similar to electronic health records and other advancements. AI on the way. Getting those claims processed faster, absolutely. Then we have the transformation with the electronic health record, which is another electronic initiative. I think that needs to be completed as well. But again, if we don't look forward, we end up looking backwards. And we need to keep pushing VA forward to invest in IT infrastructure, make sure the programs are up to date, people are trained on them, and those programs are fully funded.
So so I'm a physician as well. So you discussing, I'm over, but I'll quickly finish up. You also bring in the electronic health records. Part of the problem in some of the, is this related to service activity or not, is there's so much noise and you got to get the signal. And I think what you're saying is that if we use AI and we couple it with our massive amount of electronic health record data, we could pick out the signal of that which is, my gosh, this is service-related after all. We were never able to detect it before, and that's one more way we can serve the veteran.
I agree with that, and we also, at the same time, fully run and AI may not be exactly yet. People still make mistakes. Machines make mistakes. We're good with AI. I think it has its place, but it also needs to be subject to human review.
Human has to be in the loop. Totally with you on that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you all for your service. Once more, happy Mardi Gras.
Senator Cassidy, thank you. Before we close out this panel and transition to our second panel, let me again thank you, Commander. I often give our witnesses the chance to provide any additional momentary thoughts, things that you wanted to correct, if you made any errors, or anything you'd like to make certain that you reiterate. Commander?
Thank you very much, sir. I would like to just, again, comment about the contract. You know, contracts are contracts. There's an obligation there. I wish we could go back to shaking hands, because my word is my bond. It's the only thing that belongs to you. It's the only thing that belongs to me. Our word must be honored, and that's all we're asking. As the Senator Ossoff introduced, my life's mantra is believe in what you do what you believe in. And I know that's what this committee does. I know that you are dedicated. But again, where are we frustrated here as veterans? Effort's appreciated, but we got to get across the goal line. I'm an Army guy. I remember the Army-Navy game from a couple years ago. Navy had the ball on the goal line. It was like 6 inches away. And a touchdown, it would have changed the game. But they made a good effort, but they didn't get it across the goal line. And so Army celebrated. We celebrated. So I'm so honored to have been here.
I object.
I'm so honored that we have so many of our members as well as others here in the room. It just, I think, is a testimony to the passion that we feel and the change that we're making to better help serve you.
Commander, we also
us.
feel that. We thank you and your members and your leadership team for being with us today. I smiled when you said what you said, because occasionally I'm complimented for my efforts. And my standard response is, someday I'd like to be complimented for my results.
There you go.
And we are about results.
Absolutely.
We're going to take a brief recess. Commander, I'm going to come down and shake your hand. In the days of shaking hand meaning something important, it still means something important to me. But we're going to recess. We would ask the VFW audience, as they depart, to depart on this side, and your colleagues with other VSOs, we'll see if this works, will come in the room on this side. Let's see a lot of organization from the VFW. We stand at recess. I'm not yet quite calling the hearing back into order, but I am trying to see if we can get some order. Give us just a moment and we'll be back in session. The committee will return to order, and we will proceed to a second panel of witnesses. And we are, as we said earlier, delighted that you're here. We'll say it again in this setting. Thank you very much for your presence, for your members and other veterans who are joining us today in this hearing room. And this is our final panel of 4 panels for the joint sessions that we've had for a long history. With us today, our second panel consists of Mr. Robert Thomas, the National President of the Paralyzed Veterans of America, Ms. Allison Jaslow, Chief Executive Officer of the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Mr. Jared Lyon, National President and Chief Executive Officer for the Student Veterans of America, Major Bonnie Carroll, President and founder of Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, Meredith Beck, Vice President for Government Community Engagement at the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, and Ms. Catherine Monet, Chief Executive Officer for the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. I looked at the list of witnesses on this second panel before I attempted to pronounce your names, and there was no one that I thought I was going to have any difficulty with. But my takeaway, in addition to that relief that I know how to pronounce your names, is there's no one on this panel that I don't know, no one on this panel that this committee hasn't worked well with, and we are delighted to have the opportunity to hear from each of you today. With that, let us begin to do so. And I now recognize Mr. Thomas, Paralyzed Veterans of America.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Moore, Chairman Boss, and members of the committees, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the tens of thousands of veterans with spinal cord injuries and disorders. Today, I want to focus on PVA's top priority, preserving VA's specialty care system, specifically the VA's preeminent system of care for veterans with spinal cord injuries and disorders. On more than one occasion, I have testified before these committees about our concerns that the SCID system of care is being slowly starved of staffing, infrastructure upgrades, and funding needed to ensure its survival. Not for the sake of VA, but for the sake of the veterans it serves. My friend Rick, a fellow PVA member, received care in the community for 8 years for his SCI until he was introduced to the VA's SCID system of care. Once under VA care, his health improved. He believes he would have died if he hadn't begun to receive specialized health care from VA medical professionals who understand our injuries and illnesses. Despite best intentions, community health care providers aren't as well equipped to meet our complex needs. That's why so many veterans like myself choose care provided by the VA. The entire model was designed with us in mind. That's why thousands of PVA members and their families and supporters have signed a petition opposing any effort to dismantle the VA's SCID system of care and the life-saving services it provides. We choose VA. Unfortunately, this system is facing challenges of epic proportions, and the consequences, if not addressed now, will prove devastating for veterans with specialized healthcare needs. For example, one of the 25 SCID centers can only use half its beds because staffing vacancies exceed 50%. The leadership there recently denied again the center's request to backfill a resignation. As a result, overtime is increasing, and we expect additional resignations due to burnout and/or closures of additional SCI beds. Staffing shortages in the system aren't new. The SCID system of care has been short hundreds of nurses for years, with total staffing vacancies hovering around 35%. The department has been concealing its vacancy problems through the use of overtime, which, if taken away, may reveal much more staffing issues. Without proper staffing, veterans may be forced to accept care in the community, even when it's not the quality of or type of care they would receive at a VA facility, and most importantly, when it is not their decision to do so. In addition to staffing shortages, the system also continues to suffer from infrastructure deficiencies. The average age of an FCID center is nearly 40 years old. Consequently, we saw major incidents at several centers last year. For example, a plumbing system failure at one facility flooded half of the center. It took 1 month to repair the system, restore the impacted areas, and move patients back into the SCID center. We call on Congress to invest the necessary funds to ensure sufficient specialty care staffing and address infrastructure deficiencies to meet the demand for care. For those of us with catastrophic injuries, VA is the cornerstone of our care. The cost of inaction is clear. The lives of veterans like Rick and myself and thousands of other veterans with SCID are at stake. In recent weeks, there have been many changes in federal government staffing and funding. While we understand and generally support the underlying desire for veterans to streamline access to care and benefits, the arbitrary and haphazard way that these efforts are being approached is failing that mission and harming veterans. PVA members are concerned that VA-provided care won't be available in the future and that the life-saving research will be curtailed. Even though many clinical providers may be protected by staffing changes, not all are included, including recreational therapists who help teach veterans with SCID how to re-engage in the social part of community following a catastrophic disability. They are equally concerned about access to benefits like home modifications being delayed because of new staffing shortages. How can we expect physicians, nurses, claims raters, vocational rehab counselors, and other staff to be focused on their mission to care for the veterans while their specter of losing their jobs hangs over their heads? They carry the workload of multiple positions. They can't. As the body charged with VA oversight, I urge you to act before veterans are harmed any further. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Thomas, thank you. Ms. Jaslow.
Chairman Moran, Chairman Bost, ranking members Blumenthal and Takano, and members of the committee. On behalf of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America and our over 425,000 members and supporters nationwide, thank you for the opportunity to represent our nation's post-9/11 veterans here with you today. Being the CEO of IAVA has been the privilege of a lifetime. The young second lieutenant who boarded a plane en route to Iraq a little more than 20 years ago certainly didn't envision that this is where I'd be today. But here I am. And for every day that I've sat in this seat, I've sought to bring it for my generation of veterans. I've done my best to show up for our members regardless of where they live in the country or what their racial or ethnic background is or how they vote. I could also spend my time here today articulating a list of legislative priorities for you so that you and your staff could effectively pander to our community along with the rest of your colleagues. But as our staff and our cavalry that are sitting behind me today know at this point, that's not really my style. One of the most profound experiences I've had in my life was being appointed as a summary courts officer following a fellow platoon leader's death in Iraq in 2005. I'll never forget our battalion's paralegal looking me in the eye that same day as he handed me his orders and said, "This is the literal definition of soldiering on, ma'am." The following morning, I entered that lieutenant's quarters on our base in Taji, Iraq, with a non-commissioned officer that was also appointed to help me inventory his belongings, packed them up, and shipped them to Dover Air Force Base behind his body. My soldiers were also soldiering on that day, back on the road, providing security to convoys, dodging roadside bombs and ducking small arms fire, and continuing the mission that their country had asked them to see through, even if it no longer made any sense. Soldiering on is something that many of us who've served have gotten good at. It helped me get through a second 15-month deployment in Iraq, and even after I got out of the Army, it's a mindset that served me well as I sought to be a force of good in places like this very body where we find myself today. I may well be good at soldiering on at this point in my life, but frankly, I'm tired of it. And I know our members are tired of it too. We're tired of soldiering on after we learn that another one of our buddies has taken their life because they just couldn't deal with the torment that war had inflicted on them anymore. We're tired of soldiering on when the rest of America seemingly doesn't notice. And we're tired of soldiering on as our elected leaders give us lip service instead of the leadership we deserve. Our nation is at the hell of a crossroads right now. And our members, while they may want care for the cancer that they got from prolonged exposure to a burn pit in Afghanistan, or the ability to use cannabis to bring relief to their wartime wounds, what they really want is what the rest of America wants. They want leadership. And not just from their president, but also from the rest of their government, including this Congress that has abdicated so much of its authority in recent decades. Whether it be its war powers authority as post-9/11 generation veterans have gotten deployed over and over again without question, or the simple need to tell a president, even if that president is from their own party, that they've crossed the line that the average citizen knows they shouldn't have crossed. It then makes me wonder what the hell we fought for. If you ask many of us who served in wartime, we'll likely tell you that despite the complicated politics of the conflict we found ourselves in, what helped us soldier on in battle was our commitment to the men and women to the left and right of us. That was true for me when I was a 22-year-old platoon leader, and it remains true today. But I wish it weren't the case. I joined the Army because I love my country and what we stand for, and was willing to put it all on the line to defend it. But what I didn't realize back then, but do now, is how much that made me and my fellow post-9/11 veterans unique. What I also didn't realize as a young, naive lieutenant was how different it made us from the very people who sent my generation of veterans to war, despite the fact that we all swore a similar oath. That many of the same people who asked us to risk our lives in defense of our country were so lacking in courage themselves that they are unwilling to risk their political lives to do the same. And that should weigh more heavily on your conscience than it seems to these days. So if you really want to get the backs of post-9/11 generation veterans, how about you stop asking us and our fellow Americans to keep soldiering on when none of us is satisfied with the leadership we have in this country right now? How about you follow my generation of veterans' lead and make sacrifices on behalf of our country that prove that you're worthy of the office that you hold? And if you really care about our troops who are still serving in uniform and this country we all love, you'll do so starting today. Later this evening, the eyes of the entire country will be focused on this building and watching to see who is and who isn't meeting the moment tonight. Our IAVA cavalry members will be watching too and have every right to judge and judge harshly. If you want their stamp of approval going forward, it's my recommendation that you meet what the moment is asking of you tonight and of the days ahead. The time for asking us to soldier on has come to an end. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Jaslow. I assume that is directed to members of this committee and the United States Congress.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All 535.
We need you to be specific, forceful, and direct, as you've been, and to name names. Mr. Lyons, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Moran and Bost, ranking members Blumenthal and Takano, as well as members of this committee. Thank you for inviting Student Veterans of America to share our legislative priorities this year. I'm honored to represent the 840,000 students using their GI Bill and our over 1,600 chapters worldwide, building stronger communities for student veterans, military-connected students, their families, caregivers, and survivors. Research shows that belonging is essential to student success, be that in a traditional college environment, online learning, or vocational training. This is especially true for veterans transitioning to campuses that may not fully understand the value of their military service. SVA chapters foster that sense of community, offering mentorship, peer support, and clear pathways to academic and career achievement. If you are here with SVA today, I'd ask that you please stand or raise your hand so we can recognize your commitment. Thank you. Our mission is to empower veterans to succeed to, through, and beyond higher education. That goes beyond earning degrees and certificates. It's about strengthening our workforce, fueling innovation, reinforcing our economy, and elevating civic life. For student veterans that are here today, and the thousands more who couldn't be in Washington this week, meaningful success depends on financial stability, a sense of belonging, and access to rewarding careers. Like many veterans, I followed a path post-military service from community college to a state university and then earning a master's, all while juggling work obligations, family obligations. And my experience taught me that earned benefits must work seamlessly to encourage further engagement with VA services. When benefits fall short, delays in housing payments, or stagnant book stipends, veterans lose their trust, and they may walk away entirely. That's why we ask for these committees to see the GI Bill as the front door to the VA for recently separated service members. We thank Representatives Sismani, Stanton, Stansberry, and Van Orden for introducing the Expanding Access to Online Veteran Students Act last Congress. We urge support for legislation that mandates the monthly housing allowance, ensuring veterans aren't penalized for enrolling online, where many pursue coursework while working full-time, raising children, or managing their service-connected disabilities. A full national average MHA for online learners would move us toward true parity. We also request an increase in the annual book stipend, which hasn't been updated since 2009. Many veterans in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or law programs see material costs that easily surpass $1,000 per semester. We appreciate those in Congress who've already championed raising this to a more realistic level. Nearly 75% of student veterans are working while they're attending school, often in jobs that are unrelated to their degrees. Modernizing VA work study to include career-relevant placements such as cybersecurity, accounting, engineering, or healthcare would open doors for veterans balancing academics and employment. We applaud the bipartisan efforts to reintroduce legislation that supports this goal. These women and men bring discipline, life experience, and leadership to the classroom and their campuses. They often outpace civilian student peers in GPA and graduation rates, and they graduate into fields where American employers urgently need talent. By investing in them, Congress boosts our economy, our campuses, and our communities. Working with Congress, the VA, DoD, Department of Education, and Department of Labor helps SVA power scholarships, leadership training, research, and professional development for thousands of veterans annually. When universities partner with SVA chapters through veteran centers, collaborative programs, and flexible policies, they create a culture where student veterans thrive, benefiting the entire institution. Our full written testimony goes further into areas like bridging childcare gaps for student veterans, ensuring parity for National Guard and Reserve benefits, and expanding accountability in higher education. We encourage you to review it for a more complete picture of our policy recommendations. At SVA, we believe ensuring veterans receive earned education benefits transcends politics. This is about fulfilling America's promise to those who serve, and we know that promise yields tremendous returns for veterans, schools, employers, and communities alike. Thank you, Chairman Moran and Bost, ranking members Blumenthal and Takano, and members of these committees for your leadership. Your work reinforces that this nation truly values service and the interests of those who wear your uniforms. I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lyon. Chair recognizes Major Carroll.
Chairman Moran Bost, Ranking Members Blumenthal and Takano, and distinguished committee members, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors is grateful for the opportunity to share issues of importance to the 120,000 plus surviving family members of all generations, representing all services, and with losses of all causes of death, who TAPS is honored to serve. As a Gold Star spouse of Brigadier General Tom Carroll, I want to express TAP's deep gratitude to Congress and this committee for passing the bipartisan Senator Elizabeth Dole 21st Century Veterans Health Care and Benefits Improvement Act. This important law included multiple long-term priorities for surviving families, many of whom were caregivers first, such as expanding eligibility for the Fry Scholarship and provisions within the Love Lives On Act. A top legislative priority for TAPS is ensuring surviving spouses are allowed to remarry and retain benefits at any age, not wait until age 55. Today's surviving spouses are often widowed in their 20s and 30s, yet the law forces them to wait decades, sometimes half a lifetime, to remarry without losing their earned benefits. Grief does not expire, and love after loss should not come at the cost of financial stability. TAPS urges Congress to end this unjust penalty and honor the sacrifice of our nation's young widows with fairness and dignity. TAPS is proud to work with Chairman Moran, Senator Warnock, and 22 original Senate co-sponsors, along with Representatives Hudson, Neguse, Van Orden, Morrison, Luttrell, and Khanna, on the Love Lives On Act, and we urge swift passage of this legislation. TAPS has advocated for many years to strengthen dependency and indemnity compensation. Stringent limitations on DIC payments have widespread negative impacts on finances, housing, employment, transportation, food security, and the medical and mental health care for surviving families. Raising DIC from 43 to 55% of the compensation paid to 100% a permanent disabled veteran will increase DIC by an average of $454 a month and provide long overdue parity with other federal survivor benefits. TAPS strongly supports the Caring for Survivors Act and thanks Senator Blumenthal and Bozeman and Representatives Hayes and Fitzpatrick for reintroducing this important legislation. TAPS is also working to expand CHAMP VA coverage for eligible surviving children up to age 26 to align with private insurance plans. Surviving families who have lost loved ones as a result of military service should be provided the same access to affordable health care and mental health services as their civilian counterparts. TAPS strongly supports the CHAMP VA Children's Care Protection Act and appreciates Ranking Member Blumenthal and Congresswoman Brownlee for their leadership on this issue. As a leading voice for the families of those who have died as a result of illnesses connected to toxic exposures, TAPS was instrumental in the passage of the historic PACT Act. Though a tremendous victory, the work does not stop. Of the survivors seeking our care in 2024, 37%, or more than 3,200, were grieving the death of a military loved one due to illnesses. TAPS is working with Congress to ensure PACT Act implementation and funding and to expand presumptive conditions. We fully support the Aviation Cancers Examination Study Act and the Ensuring Justice for Camp Lejeune Victims Act and creating a presumption of service connection for all conditions from K-2 deployments. Ensuring timely, comprehensive health care and mental health support for our nation's benefits, their families, caregivers, and survivors is not just a priority. It's a moral imperative that will uphold the sacred promise we make to those who serve and sacrifice. We thank Chairman Moran and Boss for introducing the Veterans Assuring Critical Care expansions to support Service Members Act of 2025, which will improve health care and mental health outcomes. Military service exposes individuals to unique stressors and potential traumas. The presumption of service connection for veteran suicides would acknowledge that mental health challenges veterans face are often a direct consequence of their service. TAP strongly supports the introduction of the Service-Connected Suicide Compensation Act. TAPS has stood beside more than 27,000 survivors grieving the death of a devastating loss of a military or veteran loved one to suicide. These families not only endure unimaginable grief, but face stigma and bureaucratic barriers that compound their trauma, requiring them to prove service connection in their darkest moments is unjust and unnecessary. We can do better. On behalf of our survivor community, TAPS urges Congress to take action, remove these burdens, and honor the sacrifice of our nation's heroes and their families. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I now recognize Meredith Beck.
Thank you very much, sir. Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. As many of you know, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation recently commissioned RAND to conduct a new landmark study updating us on America's military and veteran caregiver community, who they are, how they're faring, and what they contribute to our nation. The report identified that while caregivers provide a minimum of $119 billion in unpaid care to veterans, they also face serious impediments to economic stability. Lost wages, an inability to plan for retirement, and unforeseen out-of-pocket expenses often result in financial and mental health strain. There are several actions Congress can take to relieve some of this burden. Recently, the VA released the newest proposed rule for the Program of Comprehensive Assistance for Family Caregivers. While we appreciate that the rule was finally published after almost 2 years of financial limbo, we have numerous concerns. The rule is still far too complicated and would be incredibly difficult to implement in a standardized and transparent manner. Additionally, we are concerned that those with significant mental health and cognitive disabilities would be excluded. EDF asked Congress to exercise its oversight authority to minimize further turmoil and ensure that those whom Congress intended to support are included. EDF also asked that Congress grandfather the legacy cohort of PCAFC participants, those post-9/11 caregivers who were admitted to the program prior to September 30th of 2020. These caregivers have repeatedly been found eligible and endured multiple pauses, regulation and leadership changes, lack of previous program standardization, and questionable assessments. Grandfathering this relatively small population would allow the VA to focus on its mission of supporting all generations of caregivers by ending this years-long struggle. In addition to PCAFC, the VA has many programs that benefit both veterans and caregivers. The Veteran-Directed Program has incredibly high satisfaction rates and notably costs less than other VA clinical support services. In theory, veterans can use the program to hire individuals familiar to them to provide care, pay for transportation to appointments, hire skilled care when needed, and all without paying the overhead costs of an agency. Unfortunately, gaining access to these programs is often incredibly difficult. In many instances, the veteran is subject to a case mix tool, ensuring that they are not receiving redundant services. While this makes sense generally, the current system does not allow complementary programs for those who need them most. Sean Lopez, a Maryland Dole Caregiver Fellow, cares for his 100% service-disabled father. In addition to other diagnoses, Sean's dad battles stage 4 cancer, suffers from progressive dementia, and requires constant supervision for safety. If Sean were not providing around-the-clock care, his father would require very costly institutional care for which the VA would be responsible. Because Sean is enrolled in PCAFC, the case mix tool was employed to determine his dad's eligibility for additional support. Even with his serious health diagnoses and despite his constant need for supervision, Mr. Lopez scored far too low to qualify him for concurrent enrollment in PCAFC and VDC. After much research, Sean learned that the scoring algorithm is weighted so heavily toward those with physical needs and mostly excludes consideration for those with cognitive and mental health needs. It was not until Sean's father fell and broke 5 ribs that he even came close to qualifying. After a significant amount of advocacy, Mr. Lopez was eventually rated at the necessary level, but if he improves in only 1 ADL, he will no longer qualify, leaving Sean to support his dad on his own or find an institution. Not only is it wrong to deny family caregivers the support services they need to care for their loved ones, it doesn't make any fiscal sense. Sean's stipend through PCAFC is approximately $40,000 a year. whereas a skilled nursing facility is far more expensive, approximately $160,000 a year in Maryland. Therefore, EDF asked Congress to work with the VA to provide oversight to this vital program to ensure veterans are able to stay in their homes as long as medically appropriate. While much work remains to be done, many of these issues outlined in RAND were addressed in some way with the Dole package that Ms. Carroll mentioned. The Foundation thanks committee members and their staffs, as well as leadership of both parties, for their hard work to find common ground and achieve final passage. However, we are deeply concerned that the current, seemingly arbitrary federal staffing reductions, the previously identified VHA budget shortfall, cuts to research funding, and contract pauses and cancellations will greatly impact the VA's ability to provide its direct vital services to those in need and implement the Dole Act. The VDC program was fortunately expanded in that Dole package. However, to continue current operations, much less expand, the program must ensure that providers are certified and recertified periodically in accordance with Mission Act requirements. Unfortunately, the contract that provides for those certifications was recently halted, leaving the future of the program and those enrolled in jeopardy. Let me be clear. We agree that the realignment of resources and staff is often necessary. We are concerned, however, that the process does not allow for the careful review and implementation necessary to ensure that services, especially those for the most vulnerable, are not interrupted. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Beck. Ms. Monet.
Chairman, ranking members, and distinguished members of the Committees on Veterans Affairs, thank you for the opportunity to join you. NCHV is the Resource and Technical Assistance Center for a national network of community-based service providers and local and state governments that serve thousands of homeless, at-risk, and formerly homeless veterans annually. We thank you for your leadership and passage of the Dole Act. We encourage you to focus on implementation of the homeless provisions within the bill. Of note, we urge you to ensure that authorizing caps and appropriations levels are sufficient to allow VA to pay for increased per diem rates authorized under this legislation and to fund Section 4201 assistance. Our written testimony includes appropriations recommendations for other critical programs. Veteran homelessness dropped to the lowest level ever recorded last year, 32,882 veterans on any given night. The 2024 HUD point-in-time count data for veterans needs a little bit of context. So I'm going to give it to you. This represents a 7% decrease since 2023 and a 55% decrease since 2009, compared with increases across the board for every other homeless population across those same timeframes. While the PIT is not a perfect measure of homelessness, it's the best national measure we have for comparison's sake. We are and we have been reducing veteran homelessness consistently in the last 7 of 10 years counted. This is no mistake, as VA staff and partners across the country have dedicated time and talent towards this mission and have had the discipline to research, iterate, and implement evidence-based and other promising practices along the way. In spite of these efforts, we know that we can do more to ensure that our crisis response, homelessness prevention, affordable housing, and supportive service programs can be what veterans need, and we look forward to doing that with all of you here. Congress plays a major role in this, and my written testimony presents NCHV's priorities for your consideration. Before I dive into them, I would be remiss if I did not mention the vast uncertainty that has been created as our federal partners have moved quickly to make changes across the government. The speed and doubt that have resulted have made it hard for grantees across the country to focus on homelessness rather than issues that impact their ability to work, including the potential implications of grant pauses, shifting grant operating requirements, reductions in VA staff, including in those who serve homeless veterans, and other federal reduction in force initiatives. Further, while we're still learning more about last night's wave of contract cancellations, we know at least one cancellation was related to the Enhanced Use Leasing Program to a SDVOSB that managed oversight, including things like lead-based testing, evaluating life safety issues in these facilities, and ensuring that veterans in EUL housing get the case management that they need. We do have concerns that quality of care will falter as a result, and we urge you to work with the administration to ensure that contract cancellations do not result in adverse outcomes for veterans. These factors have really complicated the already hard work of ending veteran homelessness. And so we do want you to collectively keep your eye on everything that we've seen so far and all of the changes that we know are to come to ensure that there is minimal impact, not only to veterans, but the community that serves these veterans. VA has been an essential partner in work on veteran homelessness, and that has to continue. I'd like to pivot a little bit back to homelessness priorities, and I have 3 major ones that I'd like to discuss today. The first is HUD-VASH utilization. We need your help to ensure that VHA and PHA's, public housing authorities, are appropriately resourced, and we need you to codify federal guidance exempting VA disability compensation from eligibility requirements for HUD-VASH and LIHTC-funded affordable housing. For far too long, homeless veterans who needed assistance the most with the highest levels of service-connected disabilities were being excluded from these benefits because of their disability income. We absolutely, unequivocally support legislation that would codify this change for the program, and we also encourage the reintroduction of legislation that would codify these changes for the low-income housing tax credit program. Second, we urge you to ensure that veterans with other than honorable discharges and those who served in the Guard and Reserve without being activated can access all homeless programs. The HCHV program currently does not serve this population, and we request that you expand its eligibility criteria to make it uniform across all programs. Third, our nation's housing affordability crisis has all but guaranteed that rents are unaffordable for everyone, including veterans. In most counties across the country, economists agree that a person earning the minimum wage is not able to rent a 1-bedroom apartment without being severely cost-burdened, and we know that only 1 in 4 people eligible for Section 8 receive them because of chronic underfunding of that program. We support legislation that would create a voucher program for all extremely low-income veterans and legislation to prohibit source of income discrimination so that people can actually use these vouchers. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. I'm going to recognize Ranking Member Takano for his questions.
Thank you.
3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Moran. And let me just say that I've been impressed with many of your comments over the past 2 weeks, especially your interest in doing oversight on the internal process that VA does to establish new presumptives. I really want to thank you for those comments. My first question is for Ms. Monet. You have been stewarding the progress to end veteran homelessness in your years of work at the National Coalition of Homeless Veterans. And during the Biden-Harris administration, we saw homelessness reach new lows. Unfortunately, Secretary Collins seems to think this progress wasn't real. He recently told the Military Times, quote, "We have spent millions of dollars and added countless programs to the homeless situation and to suicide prevention and seen nothing," he said, end quote. And quote, "I'm ready to see results and I'm ready to take whatever we have and say, what can we do better," end quote. Ms. Monet, was the progress we saw during the Biden-Harris administration real? And to what do you attribute it? What roadblocks do you foresee arising that could prevent further progress?
So the progress we've seen was absolutely real. VA programs help hundreds of thousands of veterans every day. Well, not every day, across the course of a year, I'm sorry. But, you know, there are things that we can do to improve, and I think I laid out a few of them in my testimony today. When I think about roadblocks, I do think a lot about things that are not really tied to VA, right? We don't have a lot of affordable housing. We know that people are struggling to stay employed. We know that veterans are overrepresented in a federal workforce that is getting fired at a very rapid pace. There are these challenges that we have to contend with, and within VA, there are some things that we can do, right? We can connect services to veterans a little bit better. We can be thoughtful about prevention and how we really learn about preventing homelessness and the risk factors. There's so much that we could do, but I think that we can do it if we commit to it, right?
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much for your response. I would like to ask Mr. Lyon. I met with many of your student veteran members from SVA yesterday, and I was disturbed to hear stories about many contract employees who serve as counselors. Can you tell us about the situation before these recent firings in terms of the number of counselors and the vital role they play? And they oddly enough play a role in terms of preventing waste, fraud, and abuse with the VRNE program. So tell me, the VRNE program, by the way, is a program for veterans, student veterans who is not about the GI Bill, it's about their service-connected disability and being able to get them education which will make them gainfully employed. Mr. Lyon, would you just want to respond?
Thank you very much for the question, sir. And you're right. We've had many conversations with the highest levels of VA, from appointed officials to senior government employees, about the impact that terminations are having, which I think have been well addressed by the first panel this morning and my colleagues up here today. But in particular, when we continue to hear that mission-critical roles are not being cut, we're seeing in particular with the VR&E program, a program that was already chronically understaffed and had delays with not only approving benefits, but then also addressing concerns for these service-connected disabled veterans while in school, have been exacerbated by some of the recent terminations and some of the canceling of contracts, the very contracts that were staffing some of the oversight for fraud, waste, and abuse in the program, but also approving. This is causing, in many instances, weeks, if not multiple months of delays just to hear back from the initial claim of a VR&E claim.
Well, that's meant delays, really incredible delays, and sometimes students not being able to get their courses, hardships on families, student veterans' families. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Takano. Representative Ramirez.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member. Really grateful that we're holding today's hearing. I want to start by acknowledging and thanking the veteran service organizations that are joining us today for all of the tremendous work you do every single day on behalf of our veterans. The work that we do, the legislation that we pass to bring more veteran benefits, none of that could happen without your help. So I just want to thank all of you for being here. And each time we come together, I think it's important for us to rehearse our why. Or at least for me, I believe it's my responsibility to ensure that every veteran has full access to the full spectrum of benefits that they've earned, frankly, that they deserve. As a former nonprofit community director of an organization that served people who were unhoused, people experiencing homelessness, including many veterans, I understand that often the gap between our ability to fulfill our mission and the realities on the ground are often about resources. For many housing and homeless service providers, federal grants are an essential part of the resources layered together to meet the needs of our neighbors, particularly our veteran neighbors. So I'm clear that to ensure that every veteran has full access to the full spectrum of benefits they've earned and deserve, we have to make sure that the programs and services the VA offer are fully funded. And we know that fully funding our programs can make an impact on veteran homelessness. Ms. Monet, you were just talking about it. Over the past few years, there's been a record investment on veteran homelessness, addressing veteran homelessness. And as a result, in the national point-in-time count data that I've participated in the past as an executive director of a shelter, not only have we made progress in reducing veteran homelessness, but veterans are the only population across the country that has seen a decline in rates of homelessness, according to this count. So, Ms. Monet, I want to follow up on that. I want to ask you, if there's a freeze on the grants that serve unhoused veterans, or that support that veteran permanent housing is needed, what impact do you think it would have on the ability to end veteran homelessness? And let me give you a follow-up to that. More broadly, what I'm interested in hearing is, what would those freezes mean for the organizations and the communities that depend on federal resources?
So when we experienced the last freeze, it was chaotic. Organizations were sort of pushed to the brink. And a lot of them were really running numbers, looking at their budgets, thinking really intently about their cash flow, and questioning the level of commitment that the federal government has to this initiative. At NCHB, because we have a toll-free referral line, we got calls from veterans who were upset that they had been looking for housing for 3 or 4 weeks, finally found somewhere that would take their subsidy, but couldn't get their check cut because of the funding freeze. We got calls from medical center staff who said that their SSVF provider didn't have enough cash flow to cut checks for a whole community of veterans come February 1, and they were looking for other funds to support. And, there were a lot of instances where our members were facing this uncertainty and trying to figure out, how do we work through this? What does this pause actually mean? What activities will be acceptable or not acceptable? And really thinking intently about that versus serving the veterans in front of them. And that's not what we want them to be doing.
Thank you, Ms. Monet. I know my time's up, so I just think in summary what you're saying is freezing funds means Our veterans are at risk of homelessness. It's chaos, and it means it takes us back when in fact we should be doing more for our veterans. Thank you. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Mr. Lyon, we have a long history mostly related to COVID and student access to education during those difficult times. I really appreciate your strong support, your organization's strong support for the National Guard GI Bill Parity Act. Based upon your focus, the organization's focus on the success of student veterans, explain why this change is needed and how the bill, if signed into law, would impact the outcomes of National Guard and reservists.
Thank you very much, sir, and I really appreciate the question. When you look at the service of those in uniform, regardless if it's active duty, Guard, or Reserve, every day in uniform should count equally with regard to your benefits. And unfortunately, as the GI Bill is a benefit that requires specific and nuanced related service, as pertains to Guard and Reserve members wearing that uniform, they're not equally eligible. There are countless instances in which we hear from student veterans that have been activated for any number of supports, from overseas deployments to work down on the border to natural disasters. And when they are, their service doesn't count equally for their ability to be eligible for the GI Bill. If we're able to get this done and pass this bill, we would be able to say indefinitively that every day in uniform counts equally. And so this would be exceptionally impactful for those members of the Guard and Reserve that find themselves as student veterans.
The disadvantageous circumstance for those in the Guard and Reserve is a result of the law, not a result of interpretation of the law or bias toward those not in active duty. It's the law that needs to be changed. Sir. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Major Carroll, thank you and your team for ongoing work with Senator Warnock and I in advocating for Love Lives On Act. As you know, we've been challenged by the expense of this legislation. That's not a reason not to do it, and we're fully committed to its implementation, passage and implementation. But do you have suggestions of how we can advance? We've advanced several steps of this legislation. Any suggestions as to what we do next?
Love Lives On is incredibly important to our surviving families. It's probably the top priority for those. It's something that our families are already receiving compensation for. All of those who are receiving those benefits, the DIC, are already getting them. It is only when they remarry that is taken away. The rate is so low right now, and our team has done extensive work into that, looking at that, talking, I know, to your team, to many members on exactly what that would mean, but it would allow our families to be whole, to allow our children to be raised in a two-parent household. It would allow our families to move forward with their lives. And we are very, very hopeful that the amount required will be recognized as an amount that is owed to these families who have sacrificed so much for this country.
You and others associated with you are such valuable advocates. Even what you said just now, it suggests to me, how would one say no? It is hugely important for us to have success and more rapid success. As I indicated earlier, it's nice to be thanked, I suppose, for your efforts, but this is one that would be great to be thanked for results. Major Carroll, do you have recommendations for how the VA and Congress can better work with the VSO community to reach survivors and make certain that they are aware of the benefits and resources that they may be entitled to?
Absolutely. We have surviving family members who receive some benefits, DIC, but through our networks, through public awareness, through community efforts, through other VSO partnerships, we are reaching out to surviving families. One of the ways we do this is also through the National Cemetery Administration, where we reach all those who are survivors of anyone buried at a national cemetery or a state cemetery. We're very active with the National Funeral Directors to reach all of those whose loved ones' lives included service to this country, to ensure that they have the benefits that they have earned and that their families will never be forgotten for that service.
Thank you. Speaking of national cemeteries, Ms. Monet, there are 156 national cemeteries across our country, and the NCA runs the Cemetery Apprentice Program, which offers training and employment in either a caretaker or an administrative position to veterans who are or at risk of becoming homeless. Would you speak to the importance of that program?
Absolutely. At NCHV, we think that employment is an important part of solutions for veteran homelessness. It gives folks the dignity of a job, some income, connections to other people in a network, and the cemetery caretaker program is absolutely an important part of that. I think that we would love to see that program expanded, and we would love to see more opportunities for supportive employment of veterans within VA and other federal agencies.
Thank you. And Ms. Beck, you indicated I wrote down learning more, and what you, I think, were saying before I got all my notes in place, learning more about contract cancellation. What's the level of, what happens that you're going to learn more? So where are you getting information, and what can you tell me about those sources?
The information that we have at this point, sir, is that the new round of contract cancellations, I believe it's totaling 585, is that is a reduction in the contract and the number of contracts from last week that they said were going to be reduced. We certainly hear from a number of those contract providers who are very concerned about their ability to continue to be able to provide those services. And then we certainly hear from caregivers who are concerned about that as well. As Ms. Monet indicated, we don't have any visibility on what the actual contracts are that will be included in that 585, but there is definite concern, especially about the one that I mentioned, from our perspective about the veteran-directed care perspective. The other piece of it that is of concern that we hear about quite a bit is from the research perspective, not just the funding cuts to the research, but also the staffing freezes and how that impacts the ability to execute active contracts and research initiatives that are ongoing, that we are hearing from those at NAVREF, the National Association that represents the nonprofit community that supports the research done within the VA. And those would be programs and services and clinical trials that are incredibly important for PACT Act implementation and otherwise.
Have you had any success in outreach to the VA? Either you're asking them or they're telling you what's transpiring?
No, sir, we've not.
Let me ask both Ms. Jaslow and Mr. Thomas, I don't want you to feel left out of my questioning. Anything that you would add to the knowledge base as to what's happening in regard to contract cancellation or pause? Mr. Thomas?
So, well, with the contract cancellations, we're hearing a lot of fear from our members that the SAH grants and things like that are being canceled, and our members with ALS needs their housing and everything done now. They can't wait because this is something that is demanding upon them to be able to get around and move in a house that's really accessible for them. So that is something that's really hard, canceling those contracts on SAH agents.
So is the only knowledge that is that anyone has is coming from their members or from contractors who are in the circumstance of either fearing or experiencing a contract cancellation?
So the information that we're getting is coming from our members. They had their they're in the process of getting their SAH grant, and they're calling the individual that they're in contact with, and then all of a sudden that individual is not there. So this, again, this makes them go back through the entire process all over again, which is causing many delays.
Understand. As my usual practice, is there anybody, any or all of you who have anything you want to make certain is clearly put on the record before we close this hearing?
Sir, just wanted to make one point relative to the data. In particular, VA's enrollment manager, we're reporting issues, particularly those individuals in Chapter 35 that did not receive their February payments. In addition, we've gotten reports specifically from Alabama, California, North Dakota that also have payment issues. So we're both getting it from specific members, but also the school certifying officials within the system. They can show on their end that the enrollment manager demonstrates that the payments have been processed, but then they cannot see the distribution. And then we're also getting the input from the actual veterans. It currently numbers less than 1,000 veterans impacted, but impacted nonetheless.
And that's a consequence of what? That the payments are not being made, they show on the record, but not actually being fulfilled. And what has transpired that causes that to happen?
The school certifying officials are reporting staffing challenges.
At the VA?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anyone else? Ms. Beck?
Yes, sir. I was just going to say that, for example, again, with that veteran-directed contract, which is of great concern to us, you know, many of us advocated for the passage of the Dole Act and the Elizabeth Dole Act, Home Care Act itself, based off of that and other home-based services, that in that particular example, the contractor was on the previous list to be terminated and also has a stop work order in place as the only contractor who does that certifying work to bring on new contractors for expansion. And so I think that is where we were seeing the information that was coming from, is having that stop work order in place.
And that's still true?
Until we get clarity on this new 500 on the new list, it is in place as of this moment. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Jaslow.
Sir, I just would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to thank you for your leadership on the PACT Act specifically. That continues to be an important law to our entire community. You're looking at somebody who slept next to Camp Trash Can for 15 months on my second deployment. And we all know that it almost didn't get across the finish line. So I just want to make sure that I thank you on behalf of our members for your leadership on that important law that will be an important law not just today, but for many, many years as we all age and understand the consequences of our toxic exposure. So thank you. Thank
all of you for your efforts in regard to convincing members of the Senate and the House that the PACT Act was something of value and important to pass. I think that concludes the hearing. Trying to think, I don't want to leave anything out. It does. I know what I was going to say. I knew there was something there. Ms. Beck, you get to, you don't have to advocate for the Elizabeth Dole Act because everybody else advocates for it for you. Mm-hmm. It seems just consistent, constant.
It's a benefit of being in a very supportive community, sir.
It's demonstrated again this morning. The record will remain, again, let me thank you all for your advocacy. The record will remain open. If we ask additional questions, please respond quickly. And with that, the hearing is adjourned. Thank you.